because I like to keep it nice. And as long as we've done everything possible, something does go wrong, we can still keep it nice. But I'm handing you over Eric, and hope before you all start, just whiz round everybody so we all know who everybody is. Your point of view, right? If we start on this, you all know me, hopefully. This is them. That's fine.
Paramount health and safety. Bruce. That's the one from the South East.
G verbal scary knowledge.
Emma Bailey's National Office look after equine competitions.
Shall I go this way? Yeah, Donna Jenkins, volunteer coordinator for Nationals. Lizzie Blair, steward, dressage steward, chief.
Multi-hatted.
I'm Marissa Babbington. Hi, I'm National Office. I'm the business operations manager.
Peter Dean, the National Office finance person, but on this occasion, health and safety team.
In
the corner?
Dawn Stewart, Privilege.
My boss. My wife. And my boss. My boss and my boss. And good morning, and thank you after too long for trying to put this together with everything that's going on. It feels really weird sometimes standing in front of real people that are not on the screen, and you can't mute if you want to. But I won't mute you today, I promise. You can mute me if you want. Shut me if I ask you questions. This is me. I'm a crowd and event safety manager. I was a police officer for years and then came into this. I'll explain that story a little bit in a minute, how I do, or how we got into what we're doing. My contact details if anybody's got any problems. What we are going to do is we will share all these slides. We will, later on today, we will PDF them. I don't do it beforehand for two reasons. One is that you will be sitting making notes on the slides and therefore not looking what's going on. And if we're writing, tend not to be listening, and it's important to listen to the story that goes behind what the slides say. But also because during the course of the day, you may raise questions or ask questions that lead us into another topic. There are things that we go off track on, things that are important to you, your questions. Dawn will be making notes of that. We've probably already got some material related to that. So I'll drag that into the edges. So, normal stuff. We are on a health and safety course, so we really should do some health and safety. Does anybody know if there's any fire alarms hitting today?
No.
Not as far as we know. So if we hear anything, we will. We've got a health and safety course and more sensible people. We will assume it's real until someone tells us it's not. Unfortunately, human nature with alarms now is that we assume it's fake or false until someone tells us it's real. Or we can see smoke and flames, and then we start to do the building, which sometimes might be a bit late. We will assume it's for real. Exit routes. What I would suggest that those in the front section here, out there, turn right, into the front, back row there. It's a little bit tight to get around there, but if you look to your right, you have got another exit sign, just that little corridor there. So if you take that one, and if the worst comes to the worst, and that's all on fire, I'm going to put this chair through that window and through those bushes. It might be a bit uncomfortable, but it's certainly going to be safer. Everybody, if you've got your mobile phones, if you have them on silent, if you need to take calls today, please do. If something comes in and it flashes up urgent, don't be sitting here thinking, oh my God, I wonder what that is. I really got time to. Just go and take it. You can afford to miss a couple of minutes just to go and find out what's going on. And does everybody know where the toilets are? I've been told over there. So no handouts at the moment, but we will get those. I think we've got a couple of other stuff to do by the time we get back. I'll get the PDFs done, get them sent out, and then you can circulate them around amongst themselves. If they generate any more questions, contact details will be on there. So please ask the questions. And that goes for today as well. I know sometimes it's a bit embarrassing asking questions in front of colleagues or friends, strangers. But the only stupid question is the one that stays in your head. Really is. Please, if you've got a question, we will take a break around about 11:30, just for 10 minutes for a quick coffee top up. If you don't want to ask the question in front of everybody else, sidle over to me and whisper it in my ear or write it on a piece of paper and drop it on the desk. So when I come back to my coffee, there's a question there that is anonymous and somebody else's answer. Just to let you know who we are, Junction Events, and started off having this little idea when I retired from the police. I thought I'd just work maybe a few hours a week just doing crowd and event safety. I was fascinated with crowd and event safety. How many days a week are we working now, Dawn? Feels like about 9. These are some of our clients. The Event Safety Alliance over in Canada, big national safety organisation that we're working with now. So many pictures. Birmingham Council this year, particularly, we've got City of Culture in Coventry and the Commonwealth Games. And boy, have they got some challenges, but they've really got some challenges. Universities, various organisations, Paramount Studios. Have you been to Harry Potter World? Nobody to Harry Potter? I know they're a client, but it's a studio tour, it's not whatever, it's not Disney World. But they've got problems there because they're run by an American corporation who don't like signage, including emergency signage. They just don't want it. They don't like it. They think it spoils the ethos of the show, which is a bit of a challenge when you're trying to get 17,000 people to safety when the smoke alarms keep going. This is who we are. I'm the chair of something called the United Kingdom Crowd Management Association and chair of another voluntary organisation called the Global Crowd Management Alliance, which was just in December. If anybody is interested in crowds and crowd behaviours and crowd issues around the world, speak to me about those organisations, because we're doing loads of work around the world now in terms of keeping the crowd safe. And obviously we're involved in some of the more recent activities that have taken place, multiple fatality events. In Texas, 10 people killed that day just recently. And all we're trying to do, that silly little idea of working a couple of hours a week, just grew and grew and grew and grew. We're now working studios. And I think we're back out to Canada in 2 weeks, 2 weeks. Don't ask me when I'm going anyway. If you want to know where I'm going to be at any time, go and ask them. I honestly have to do. I really want. What I want to start with today is the gritty bit, the unpleasant bit. Now, I do this for 2 reasons. One, because it's important that you understand where we stand legally, where are our responsibilities, all of us individually, but also because it tends to focus people's attention for the rest of the session. If you look at what might go wrong, what could go wrong, and what the consequences for us are, then it's a good starting place. It'll take about 20 minutes to do, but that's all. Please don't walk out at the end of it thinking, I've had enough, I'm going. Because we're then going to go on to the stuff that says, this is how we can avoid any of that stuff happening. But what we're going to talk about first is things that could go wrong. So the first one is duty of care under common law. Now, in theory, unless you are an employee of RDA today, if we looked out that window and we saw someone fall over and bang their head on the floor, legally, we can just ignore that person. If you're an employee of RDA on RDA premises, that's different because you are an employee, so some law applies to you. But as volunteers, or as a guest here today, or just walking down the high street tomorrow, we can ignore that old lady that's fallen over and smashed her head on the floor. Doesn't feel right, but for most of us, we wouldn't do it. But legally, we have no duty of care. The duty of care is established either through your work, because you have a legal duty, or because you go and build a relationship with or building a relationship. So if I go over, ask if she's okay, and she turns over moaning, and I see blood on her face, but I don't like blood, I'm just going to walk away and ignore it. I've now broken the duty of care. The duty of care I've established by walking over and approaching them. The duty of care is important. You can never be charged with failure of a duty of care. There's no such offence. But the failure of duty of care applies to so many pieces of legislation that that's what they will have to establish first. Did you have a duty of care for that person? Did you have a duty of care for that situation? That's the very, very first fundamental question to ask. And for all of us in the room, when it comes to something like chance, although we're volunteering under an organisation, and that gives us a duty of care to not just walk away and ignore something. So that's the starting principle. The second thing they'll establish is whether there was negligence. And negligence is a really open context or concept. The problem with negligence is it will be judged by people with that fantastic scientific expertise that they call hindsight. What you do today, if something then goes wrong, someone dies or got injured, will be dragged through the courts for, well, how long? The Manchester inquiry is still ongoing 5 years after the Manchester bombing. Just last year, we had another trial for one of the people involved in the Hillsborough disaster. in 1989. How long will it go on for? Anybody's guess. There is no statute of limitations. In 2019, a case was held against Barclays Bank for situations that were occurring in their employment during the 1960s and 70s. How anybody's supposed to be able to remember what was going on back then, I really don't know. But just accept that there is no limit on how long these things might go on. The one thing I would always say to you is, any time you're doing anything like this, just have a little notebook and pen in your pocket. Just tiny little notebook. I carry a little blue notebook every time I'm at work, or volunteering, or doing anything related to events. Just scribble stuff down, the date, the time, the place, what happened, and what you did about it. And keep it. Don't just keep it for a few weeks, keep it for a long time. I've got a little tray at home full of these little notebooks dated. I've still got most of my notebooks from when I was in the police. And I'm glad I have, because 5 years after I left the police, they came back to me and said, oh, do you remember that incident that you had? And no, I don't, but I can go back and check my notes, and there they were. So just keep a little notebook. They're going to have to prove negligence on your part. They're going to have to prove that it was reasonably foreseeable that whatever happened was going to happen, or likely. So is it likely that a major airline is going to crash one of its aircraft onto the RDA side, onto the championship side? No. You shouldn't be planning for it. You shouldn't be worried about it. It's one of the easiest things that can ever happen is a major disaster on your event site, because what would you do about it? A, you may not have survived it in the first place, and B, you can have all these blue lights arriving to help you. They're the ones that I don't worry about at all. Is it reasonably foreseeable that one of the riders might fall off a horse and injure themselves badly, including potentially a broken neck? Yeah. We don't want it to happen. It shouldn't happen, but it's possible. It's reasonably foreseeable that it may happen. So we should have plans in place for that. And you've got plans in place for that. We'll go through that. If it's reasonably foreseeable that somebody else may suffer harm, have you got all the steps in place that you need to either prevent it from happening, sometimes you can't, or B, make sure you've got a plan in place to recover. And that's what we're going to talk about. And then they'll talk about the standard of care. Would a reasonable person have done similar thing in similar circumstances? What would a normal person in the street, they sometimes refer to the man on the Clapham omnibus, which is a case going back to the 1920s. The man on the Clapham omnibus is supposed to have, describes the average person. What would they have done in your circumstances? Would they have done what you did? Would they have done less? Or would they have done more? I think most of us would do more than an average person, because we're better equipped, we're better trained, we know what the event is, we know what's likely to happen and how we go. Did we cause it? Was it our fault? Was there something that we didn't prevent that might have prevented that from taking place? Is there something else we could have done? Something reasonably else we could have done? Or was the thing so remote, so distant, that we couldn't possibly ever have envisaged that happening? I always like to refer to this. Everybody recognise that little boat? What sank the Titanic? Okay, your starter for 10.
Iceberg.
An iceberg sank the Titanic. Was it just the iceberg?
Captain error.
Captain error? What was the captain's error?
Didn't see it coming.
Didn't see it coming. Whose job is it to look out for icebergs? The lookout. Why didn't the lookout see it coming?
He did.
Don't go
He
too
did. He
fast.
saw it really late. We know why he saw it really late.
Did he have a radio signal?
Later.
He ignored it.
There had been a radio signal downstairs. Yeah. The lookout was using a really valuable piece of equipment, binoculars, because the first mate has kept the binoculars locked in his cabin. And the first mate was a bit of a nasty person, and everybody was scared of him. But because of his attitude, nobody knocked on the door and asked for the binoculars. Was the ship going too fast?
Yeah.
Going really fast, because they were trying to break the sea record, crossing record, to get across, because they had a whole bunch of people on board, very, very important bankers that were going to invest in Cunard after that ship crossing, if they broke the record. But what else was going on? They're the causes of it sinking, not just the fact they hit the iceberg. The causes of what happened go back years. When they were building that ship, they unexpectedly had 2 of their other ships damaged, and they had to repair them in the same dock where that was taking place. So they couldn't get hold of enough of the rivets of the really strong type. And because she wasn't due to sail for 18 months, but these already had bookings, they used their best stuff on the repairs on the ships. So instead of getting good steel rivets for the Titanic, thank you, because they couldn't get the good steel ones, they used pig iron and said that'd be all right. But pig iron in cold water is really brittle. Guess what? We're just about to sail through really, really cold water. You can trace the causes of the Titanic sinking back about 7 years. Because when they hit the iceberg, those pig iron rivets all snapped in half. And instead of just one panel opening and water coming into one watertight section, it took 1/3 of the ship out because that impact. So we now know that the causes of the sinking of the Titanic aren't just it hit an iceberg because it was going too fast. In fact, one of the reasons it was going too fast is everybody know that they set sail with a fire on. They actually left with the fire on board the ship in the coal bunker. You cannot put a fire out in the coal bunker. There's one way to do it, and that's to dig all the coal out and get it into the furnaces as quick as you can. So they were shoveling coal for 3.5 days. They sort of tried to put that fire out. But that's one of the reasons why it was going so quick. Every single incident that we look back at in history has got causes that go back years. Hillsborough was blamed on Superintendent David Duckenfield because he opened the gate and let a whole lot of people through into an area that was already overcrowded. Except it was overcrowded because the signage was awful, and it had been known as being awful for 4 years. Signage was really confusing. How can you go through gate 27 and then walk in and see walking areas A, B, F, G, C, E, D? Who does that? Everybody's going to walk in and stop and go, what? If they stop inside those gates and it gets full, that leads to pressure situation. Everybody knew within the organisation that the barriers were rusting at the bottom. So what did they do? Piled them down and painted them. They didn't replace the barriers. It was one of those barriers that everybody knew was weak that failed that led to the Hillsborough disaster. We can trace the cause of Hillsborough back 7 years. And this is the challenge for all of you, is to go out and say, what are all the little things that we know that go wrong frequently, a little bit, but actually they all happened at the same time? If all those things occurred at the same time, would that lead to something really, really risky, really dangerous? So that's your challenge during the course of today and going forward. Think of those things that might pile up to lead to one thing. We're going to look through some legislation and see how all of those pieces of legislation apply to your procedures and policies. We're going to have a look at your procedures and policies. So we've looked at the due care, principles of due care, principles of due diligence, and what we do and what are we responsible for. There's something called the Occupiers Liabilities Act. Anybody heard of it? It gives you a legal duty to make safe any place, property, actually, or buildings, cars, caravans, anything that you are responsible for. Who thinks the Occupiers Liability Act applies to them? Every single one of you, assuming you live somewhere. Because even if you live in a tent in the middle of a field, you are legally responsible for the 1957 Occupiers Liability Act for making it safe for other people who might visit you. If you're going to invite guests around to dinner in your tent, it would have to be safe for them to be there. Anybody know what the 1984 amendment says? You've also got to keep it reasonably safe for trespassers. Now, I'm not going to look at anybody individually, but some of you will remember the days when if you lived in back-to-back housing with brick walls at the end of the tenement, you used to have broken glass and barbed wire and all sorts of things to stop bad people climbing over. And then in 1984, everybody had to take it down because we weren't allowed to deliberately injure trespassers anymore. You couldn't have a bear pit that the burglar could fall into as he climbed over the wall. That's just not allowed. But we all have a duty to keep our premises safe. For the champs, that falls as a split responsibility. It would fall with the venue as the primary controllers and managers of the land. You probably don't know that. They will also fall to you because you're leasing effectively the property for that day. So again, if we see things that they have got wrong, that they need to fix, that we can't, it's not our job to fix their property, we need to identify those factors. And I would suggest not just verbally, that's a message via email or text or some recordable system where you say to them, we've got a problem. It's Friday and there's not many people coming today, so it's not a major issue. But Saturday and Sunday, when the place is full, we think that could be a problem. So could you do something about it as a matter of urgency? Or if you go and do a pre-site visit a month in advance, go and have a walk around. I don't know if you're planning to do that this year.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Have a look around and then close your eyes that day and go, on the Saturday, on the Sunday, on our busiest days, would this cause me a problem? So you're almost looking, and in some ways it's good this year, because we're visiting all our event sites again with clean eyes. We've got to assume 3 years on that it's almost a new event. We've got to almost start from scratch in our heads and get this as if we're going in there for the very first time. So literally there are clean eyes on this that are going to be seen for the first time in 2022 who weren't around in 2019. And they're the people that might spot stuff and go, why is that like that? And if the answer is, well, it always has been, or if your answer is, well, we always do it that way, that's not a great answer. So challenge yourselves to think a little bit wider and go, why do we do it that way? Why does it look like that? And then try and fix the problem. So that's the Occupiers Liability Act. That puts legal responsibilities onto them. Health and Safety at Work Act, we all know, most of us will know at least. There's a significant piece of the Health and Safety at Work Act called Section 3, Health and Safety at Work. That means we've got legal responsibilities for everybody affected by our workplace activity. So, workplace activity at the RDA Champs, an RDA event, RDA are the employers of people, Health and Safety at Work Act applies. Applies to all their staff and all their employees, but it also applies to volunteers and the public attending that day. We have legal responsibilities on the Health and Safety at Work Act to keep people as safe as we reasonably can, reasonably in the circumstances. Accepting that some people turn up at events and don't always behave sensibly. And there's a limit to what we can do in terms of controlling people's behaviour. We sometimes say in the events world that it seems to be that people buy a ticket for an event and on the day they leave the house, they take their brain out and put it in the fridge. Because they turn up and just expect us to do everything to keep them safe that day. We can't. That test of what is reasonable. But if you see wires draping along the floor that people are liable to trip over, you've got to do something about it. You can't just ignore that. You've got to say something to someone to get it fixed or fix it yourself. Management of health and safety work regulations, risk assessments. Who does risk assessments as their normal part of their business? Who does it not work generally? I do. A couple of you? Yeah. We're going to look at risk assessments a little bit later and how to simplify them, because there are certainly some government departments that would like to make them more and more and more complicated to the point where people actually stop doing them. There's no need for them. Who's done a risk assessment this morning? When you got up this morning, did you look out the window to see what the weather was like before you decided when you were going to wait to go out? If you did, you just done a risk assessment. If you had to cross a road to get to your car, to get to the train or to the bus station, and you stopped and looked left and right, you did a risk assessment. That's what we're doing. Everything we do is about risk assessment. We just don't think about it in those terms. It's really simple. Is there a risk? How dangerous is the risk? Am I going to take that risk, or is it something I can do to reduce and mitigate? It's as simple as that. I'm crossing the road, a quick look left and right, I'm going to cross a country road and I'm clear. But if it's a motorway, am I even going to think about crossing the road, knowing how fast vehicles are on the road? We look at what could go wrong, how bad it could be, people that affect us, then decide whether or not we're going to do it, or whether we need an alternative. Footbridge over the motorway, 100 yards down there, the 100-yard extra walk. That's as simple as it is. Health and safety first aid regulations is about the equipment and the people that we have on scene. Are they suitable for the likely, reasonably foreseeable medical issues that arise? It's as simple as that. Human Rights Act we always mention, because apparently when we plan events, we're supposed to not plan to kill people. That's what it says. You know, if you can plan not to kill anybody today, that would be really useful. I'd like to think we need this legislation to tell us not to kill people. But apparently we do. So don't plan to kill anybody today. Unless you're in Saudi Arabia, they plan to kill people every week. They have mass executions on a frequent basis, and they have events where they take people out and kill them and other people die as a result of crushing and trying to watch the execution. If anybody wants a £500,000 tax-free contract, it's still available in Saudi Arabia. They just want a crowd manager to go over and stop all the other people dying. Any volunteers? Tax-free? £500,000? Cash in hand? Funnily enough, they haven't got any volunteers for that one. Private Securities Industries Act touches on this a little bit because you have employed security on the event side of security ships. We have a problem this year because we are 60% down overall in private security guards on the event side. So if you haven't yet spoken to the normal security company, it's only a couple of people in the car.
Yeah, they're no longer. We've
They're not
had to get a new company.
I'm not surprised that a lot of the smaller companies, they had no work for 2 years. What are you going to do if you're a security guarding company and there's no events? So a lot of those have gone. Have you managed to get one?
Yes. Yeah, and they're coming to the site visit in the beginning of May.
Fantastic. If they are honest with you, they will tell you. I mean, it's not a big ask, it's not a huge number, is it?
No, there's a few. I think we have 2 people walk around at night, and I think I've got booked 3 to do help with car parking and 2 to park lorries.
Right,
So
that's
yeah.
Generally speaking, for most major events this year, we're expecting to be about 20 to 30% short. Glastonbury were advertising last night on the Facebook site. There are 700 security guards short of Glastonbury. That is a dangerously low number. They're in real trouble, but all events are. And as for Jubilee weekend, maybe think about it. If anybody's thinking about putting anything on a Jubilee weekend, if you think you need security for it, you've got no chance. We haven't got anything working out. Even for the Queen's funeral plans, which we're rewriting at the moment, we know we can be about 30% short. We're not rewriting them because she's any more ill than normal. We do them every year. Refresh and renew every year just to make sure where we are. In terms of security, just be aware. They should be honest with you. They should say, yes, there are problems and there are challenges, but we are covered for your event. It's not massive. So be aware. If there's any problems with them,
Okay,
in
great.
fact, it might be like you should copy their name.
Yeah, okay, we'll do.
Check with all the registers to make sure that we know who they are.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Equalities Act. If we can't get the Equalities Act in this organisation, we're in trouble. So I'm not going to touch on that too heavily. But there are plenty of organisations that we work with who just dismiss that. Unfortunately, for most music concerts, it's about putting a raised viewing platform for people in wheelchairs, and that's it. That's it. They think they've done that and they've achieved everything. The fact that 90% of disabilities in this country are invisible doesn't even occur to them. The fact that they might have to evacuate that disabled viewing platform at some stage doesn't even occur to them. But I'm pretty sure we're getting it right in this organisation. What's the regulatory reform fire safety order? It's a very little known, but actually very well used piece of legislation. If the fire brigade turned up on your site and said, what is the evacuation plan for getting people out of this building, or out of stables, or out of champs buildings, the riding areas, if you couldn't, as an organisation, give them that answer straight away, what is the evacuation plan, they can and they do shut the event down. That is it. They will just shut it down. No notice, no warning. It's, we need to know your plan now because you should know your plan now. Not pick on you, pick on you, pick on the steward, pick on the security guard. Who do I go to? Who's in charge?
If on cue.
So I'm guessing everybody's going to point towards Anne or someone else, and you should be able to say, right, the plan, here's the plan, there's the evacuation plans. Okay. Thanks very much. But they have got incredible powers to shut down. Corporate manslaughter, Corporate Homicide Act tends not to worry me so much. Clues in the title. Nobody's going to prison. You can't send an organisation, even a charity, you can't send it to prison. Corporate manslaughter, corporate homicide is when organisations do things badly that leads to someone dying. What may happen though is if an individual in the organisation is deemed to be the person that's responsible for what went wrong, primarily through neglect, it's that one at the bottom, gross negligence manslaughter. And we're seeing quite a lot of that at the moment. So does anybody remember about there were 4 or 5 whitewater rapids orders down in South Wales who were out in the river. The organiser had been told the river's running high, the weather's looking bad, we're not sure it's a great idea. but she decided anyway to take money and let those people go out. 4 of them died as a result. She was arrested within 2 hours. She's on bail, will now be on bail for the next year, whilst they decide whether she has committed gross negligence, whether her decision to not listen to the advice that the weather was bad and the wind was the river was running high, she will have to A, live with her conscience for the rest of her life that 4 people died on her watch, and B, she made the decision so she could face criminal charges. And there are quite a few instances in the UK over the last few years where people have faced criminal charges. Just one more thing I want to talk about. I can't tell you about yet because we don't know what it's going to be. But it's this thing called Martin's Law. Has anybody heard of Martin's Law? But Martin Hett was one of the young men that died in the Manchester bombing. His mum, Tegan Murray, who I speak to almost weekly or twice weekly, we share platforms with, she pushed really hard to get a new piece of legislation to protect people at events. I don't think it's going to be in place for this year. I'm pretty sure it won't be. There isn't time. But almost certainly by next year, and we may need to speak again for next year, the protect duty or Martin's Law will come into power, and it will be a legal requirement for anybody who is holding events with large numbers of people, and they're talking about 500 upwards, or runs any public space where large numbers of people gather normally, city square, town hall square. Someone in that organisation is going to have to undertake counterterrorism risk management threat assessment, or the CTRM. We're hoping that they will supply through Martin's Law a ton of guidance and checklists and templates that you can use to do the assessment. I'm not a counterterrorism expert, but I've got lots of friends who are, and if the law will stay in touch, and if the law says it's now applicable to you, we need to speak about who's going to be able to do that for you, or whether you're going to be able to do it yourselves with a little bit of training or a little bit of support. We're linked into one of the big companies. Just be aware of that. It will come in. Home Office are in a bit of a pickle at the moment, but by the end of this year, I suspect the protect duty will be in. But whether it comes in or not, the Manchester inquiry has already made its recommendation. Well, the first part of its 3 recommendations, the first one is out, and it's already talked about enhancing security and being alert and aware. If something looks wrong, something just doesn't fit, you've got to be prepared to call it out to someone and say, that person just doesn't fit in here. And for those that follow the Manchester inquiry at all, one of the biggest tragedies is the security guard saw the guy with the rucksack, thought he looked suspicious because he was hot and sweaty and nervous and looking around. And he didn't call it out to anybody because he was an Asian guy and he didn't want to be accused of being racist. So he just stayed quiet. He thought if he accused that guy of being a terrorist just because he was dark skinned and looked like he might be a Muslim, then he would be accused of being a racist and lose his job. Had he just gone and told somebody who could have gone and checked, the 22 people who died would have survived. Now, somebody would still have died, because that guy was always going to detonate his bomb. It might have been the security guard or the police officers or the management of the company that walked up and approached him that would have died. The point is that 22 kids at the festival wouldn't have. Just keep an eye on that as it comes in. Right, that's all the bad stuff. What about the good stuff? Has anybody heard of this? The Purple Guide. If any of you are doing events, this is the Bible. This is a 34-chapter online document that will cost you, sadly, £30 a year. Or I could share my login with you. I didn't say that. Are we recording it?
Yes.
I will never ever share my login because that would be a breach of some sort of copyright. I'm sure I wouldn't do that.
I'm sure we can stretch that.
I'm sure. If you can't. So you can't really see the chapters up there, but to go through that, they're everything: how to build an event site, how to build it safely, necessary sanitation. It gives you guides on if you've got 1,000 people for 12 hours in the day with alcohol being served, how many toilets you have, basic stuff like that. There's nothing I have seen, because if there was, I would have told you, that breaches anything in the Purple Guide. There's nothing I've seen in the champs that is going against that, but it's always handy to have a little reminder. And there's fresh chapters going in there all the time. We've just written one about counterterrorism and its impact on events and crowd management. So there's some really good stuff in there. We'll have a chat about that, but at the moment there's nothing I'm seeing in 2019 that would make me go, oh, you need to have a look at chapter 17 of the Purple Guide. It's a really, really handy piece of advice. actually applicable to your venue, champs, is this: the guide to safety at sports grounds. But I wouldn't recommend that. It's all about football. There's a little bit about rugby and cricket. It's all about football and football movements and football behaviour and how to deal with players being thrown on the pitch. So if anybody says it's a sports ground, it is technically. You're at a sports ground, but you're not really doing anything that's relevant to the bingo. And there is this thing called the alternative use of sports ground, which probably is more applicable, but I would stick to the purple guide. Got the purple guide, you're doing just about everything right. Now, one thing to be aware of this year, and please, if you get contact from anybody from the council, give me a shout straight away. There is something in the UK called safety advisory group processes. We have safety advisory groups that are made up of local authority, fire police, ambulance, highways, all those people who are supposed to help us keep things safe. Previously, prior to 2019, an event like this would not have gone through a safety advisory group process. During COVID, when events started again, they put absolutely everything through the SAG process. And it can be quite daunting to go into a room. You can have 20 people in that room asking you questions from all the agencies, the emergency services, potentially somebody from the Counterterrorism section. If you get a call to say, we need you to come to SAG so we can understand your event better, give me a shout. But I will get the guidance for the good practice guide working in SAGs. It's free. That's online this week, so I'll send that. Managing crowds safely, not too worried about that. But one thing that would be useful for you, I think, if you haven't already got it, is the lightning guidance. Because there is now guidance. The problem with all of this guidance is if it exists and you don't know it exists, and you do something different from what the guidance says, that's the one the lawyers will pick afterwards and go, well, why didn't you follow the national guidance? And the national guidance has now been around since 2019, wrote at a completely inappropriate time because we wrote it and then COVID came in, so there was no events anymore. But because of that, it's fallen off people's radar. So just have a look at that. Because I think, who was told by their parents that if there's a flash of lightning, you start to count, and for every second between the lightning and the thunder, it's 1 mile away. Yeah. We all need to go. I mean, I can't, and possibly most of you can't.
And walk in the middle of the road.
Walk in the middle of the road. Stay away from trees.
Just push the middle of the road.
Don't walk in the middle of a road if it's got trees down both sides. Yeah.
Although don't get under a single tree on the road, in a forest you'll find, not a single tree.
Yeah, there is some truth to that because trees do attract, they're high objects, and they do attract lightning. The problem with them is as the trunk gets broader at the bottom, the lightning looks for easier ways to go. And if there's a branch it can go along to, which actually reaches the branch or touches the branch of another tree, it sends little shoots out sideways. But if you're walking down the middle of a road with trees on both sides, and one of them, lightning shoots across. Actually, it's an incredibly dangerous place to be. You'd be better nearer to one of the trees. But if you were told 1 second between flash and bang, as I was by my parents, I need to go and have a word with them. Good, but I can't, because that's wrong. It's 5 seconds is 1 mile. So if you are hearing flash and a bang 5 seconds apart, the storm is already within 1 mile, which is a problem because lightning bolts can fire forwards out of a lightning crowd 20 miles. By the time you can hear the thunder, the next lightning bolt is already within reach of you. So if we're going to put events on, especially if we've got people who might be taller than other people, with large attractive objects that the lightning might want to hit, horse, someone sitting on the back of it, what's in the helmets? Are they all plastic or are there any metal in there in the strap?
There's metal actually on some of the strap.
On the buckles and the straps?
Mainly plastic.
Yeah.
But
If there's any metal in there at all, that becomes an attraction. So we know we would dismount and we would get horses to us quickly. But the question is, how soon would we need to do that? So if we know there's lightning in the air that day, we need to keep an eye on it. I mean, there are very, very, very rare occasions where you can have lightning out of a clear blue sky. There are some very peculiar weather phenomena that you can't even see a cloud, it's completely blue and sunny, and lightning suddenly occurs. Exceptionally rare. But if we've checked the weather the night before and there's a warning of lightning the next day and we're on, we need to keep an eye on that lightning that day. Because, generally speaking, we're talking about an hour before that storm sits over the top of us is the point at which we would be dismounting and getting people to a place of safety. We'll talk about that in a little bit more later. Latest guidance for counterterrorism, someone is going to have to look at it. Someone at some stage is going to have to look at that now, because this year we cannot do nothing about terrorism. We know that terrorists are still out there. We know that they're trying to cause us pain. We know they're trying to. I'm cleaning the windows.
I thought it was raining.
I thought it started raining.
No, it's like sunny.
So we can have a conversation about that as well. But we can do it just to at least give a nod to the fact that we were aware of terrorism and events. But the problem is, all the big, large events now have got really good counter-terrorism measures in. So we've seen what the terrorists are doing. They're walking into parks on a Sunday afternoon, stabbing people in the park. The easier the target, the easier it is for them. Is it likely? Are you on TV? Are you a major event that the whole world knows about? No, it's highly unlikely, but you can't just pretend it's not going to happen. You've got to do it. So, I did say that was the horrible stuff, that's the nasty stuff. Any questions on that so far? Okay. Gross negligence manslaughter, I said I'd talk about it. This is how easy it is. March 2016 is the last conviction of a person, and some of you may remember this. A bouncy castle blew away in a gust of wind. There was wind forecast that day, but not as bad as it actually turned out to be. And it was physically, the way the site was built, they built a wind tunnel on this event site, this fairground. You know those rides now where you get on and it goes up and whizzes around, but it's all comes off the back of a big lorry and it folds up, but they're vertical, right? And what they did with that dozen of those, they put 6 in a row one side, 6 in a row the other, and they built an alleyway around the back. So they built a wind funnel, and right at the end of that wind funnel, unfortunately, was this bouncy castle. It was a regular fairground ride. It had been checked, it had been inspected. The two operators of that were only 23 and 24 years old, but they both ended up convicted of gross negligence manslaughter because they didn't check there was enough pins. Does anybody use bouncy castles at any of their own events, fundraising events, or even in your back garden? Just double check the instructions. They should always come with instructions. Please double check them, because that, as well as a young girl losing her life, meant that 2 people went to prison for 18 months each. They got sentenced to 3 years, but they served 18 months. Very simple, basic mistake. Very simple error on their part. It's something they do every day of the week. They're fairground operators, but that day they just overlooked something. I honestly did not expect them to be convicted for gross negligence manslaughter. The evidence wasn't there for gross negligence. They were negligent, but not grossly negligent. And we were all surprised when the jury made a decision that they were grossly negligent. But 7-year-old girl dies. Someone wants justice.
Perhaps they were setting a precedent for future.
Yeah, and certainly what we've seen since then is wherever, particularly if it's a young child dies, they jump to this gross negligence manslaughter straight away. Incredibly, they didn't even appeal it. They were so scared of getting their sentence increased that they didn't appeal it, which I think was an error. I think had it gone before 3 High Court judges, it would have been overturned. But that precedent, as you quite rightly say, is definitely there now. So we just need to be aware of it. We need to do everything as reasonably well as we can. Never ever, that phrase that they use on the underground all the time, see it, say it, sort it. If you see something that doesn't look right, either fix it or tell someone the problem and let's get it sorted out. Any questions on that? That's the horrible stuff. I really don't like doing the horrible stuff. But we've got to get that out of the way. We've got to be honest and talk about it. So, risk assessments. Hands up all the people that do risk assessments, they said. Excellent. Good. What's the most important part about risk assessment? Looking after me. If I'm writing the risk assessment, my name's on the bit of paper. I've got to think about myself as well. I've got to think about, this is the piece of paper which, if I don't do properly or get it right, somebody is going to waive in the future in the course of law. If you do the risk assessment, the first part, it's just like first aid. We never do CPR on the fast lane of the motorway, do we? Because that would be pretty damn stupid, because we would be vulnerable to all those lorries. Well, we could do it if all the lorries were parked and blocking it, but we've got to think about number one first. We've got to think we're no good healthy casualties if we become the next casualty. We're no good risk assessors if we're not thinking about ourselves at all. So number one is always going to be you. Those that do health and safety and do it a lot will tell you that it is 99% common sense. We do risk assessments every single day. You made a cup of coffee earlier on, but you didn't go pour out, oh, it's steaming, I'll just swallow it down in one. You just had a quick check and felt the temperature, moved, felt the cup. You did it all subconsciously, but your brain was doing a risk assessment for you all the time. And most of the risk assessments you do are subconscious. We just need to then put those into writing. It's that application. And people, even the health and safety executives, say people take health and safety too far sometimes. You can't guard against everything. You can't guard against people doing crazy things. Now, sometimes you can predict that people will do crazy things. I know at some music festivals, there will be someone that's going to take drugs, and they will be coming into my medical tent, and we'll make them better and send them out, and guess what? They'll go and take some more of the same stuff. And we get the same people go through the medical tent over and over again because people do crazy stuff. Some people will climb the lighting gantries, even though it's dangerous, because they're drunk or taking drugs. Some people will do some crazy stuff. The questions we've got to ask ourselves first are, who is responsible? Who's responsible under the Health and Safety at Work Act? Who is the named individual or organisation responsible? As employers, under Section 2, employers of an organisation or staff have legal responsibilities to them, but it goes beyond that. Section 3 I've already talked about. Third parties includes anybody affected by your workplace activity. So if you are putting on the jumps or you are putting on a small fundraising event for your yard, the public that come to it have protections, as do volunteers that are helping you work that day. They are legally protected under the Health and Safety at Work Act. One of the things to remember about the Health and Safety at Work Act is organisations can be convicted, but so can individuals. In 2005, a large inflatable structure in Chesterley Street in Durham blew away. And it wasn't a bouncy castle, it was half the size of a football field, and people went inside it. Nice mood music and coloured lights. It was one of these artistic, creative things that, beyond me, I don't get. It's not me. I don't do art, don't do creative. I just go, well, these people, and they need managing. That's my job. You get on with the creative artists. Well, they also walk around, if I have been there and gone, this is the biggest inflatable structure I've ever seen in my life, half the size of a football field. And there's bolts into the ground in each corner and in the middle halfway along. Well, that's not enough for a bouncy in my back garden. There should be more than that, but there wasn't. It blew away. There was 52 people inside it, 2 people killed and 50 injured. Not only did the organisations, the company and the council all get prosecuted, but the man who's in charge of safety got individually prosecuted, plus one of the council staff who should have been overseeing that work, one of the employers of the land that was being used. All of those were charged with criminal offences. So it's individual responsibility as well as corporate responsibility. You've got to remember that. Duties of employees at work under Section 7. What are your duties as employees? Well, A, not to do stupid stuff. If there's a fire extinguisher, don't go and hide it somewhere. That would be a little bit silly. But if there is a fire extinguisher and somebody expects you to operate it, they should have told you how to operate it. And when they've told you how to operate it, you should have listened properly and be comfortable with operating it. Because you might be the first person in the room with a small fire in the corner, and you hit the alarm bell to warn everybody else, shout for help. You could then potentially stop the whole building burning down, setting off a fire extinguisher into a small waste bin in the corner. They're your duties as employees to act sensibly and make sure that what you're doing helps everybody else. And those duties apply to everybody that's employed. It's going to be everybody who's on the event site effectively. And for you down at the championships, it would also include any staff who are from the venue that work on site. All of those duties would apply to them as well. For many of you acting as volunteers at the championships, and for and others, it's possibly having a look at this website. Don't forget, you're going to get all these links, so you don't have to scribble all this down and get these slides. Most times, the Health and Safety at Work Act doesn't apply to volunteers. So you're not protected in law as a volunteer under the Health and Safety at Work Act. If early June, there are going to be more street parties in early June for the Queen's Jubilee than we've probably ever had before. People will be closing cul-de-sacs, it's all volunteers, and nobody is actually employing anybody to do anything. Those volunteers would have no protection of the health and safety work. But if you are an organisation bringing people in as volunteers and you are paying other people, you are a proper corporation, proper organisation, then you would have legal responsibilities under health and safety work. But in any case, even if they didn't, they would have the opportunities to sue you under the health and safety, under the occupied liability. So there are legal responsibilities for all of us. Civil law will always apply. Someone can sue you for anything, anytime. Anytime you're hurt, the laws are taught to call them. If you're hurt and it's somebody else's fault, they can sue you. But let's face it, there's plenty of no win, no fee lawyers out there who are prepared to take the case that they are a pain in the butt. But for volunteers working under health and safety, under the RBA, Health and Safety Work Act will apply. And volunteers come in quite a few different forms. I've said 5 normally, but you fall in the best categories. I can advertise volunteers for a marathon this weekend for people to come out and stand in the road and put a yellow jacket on. I would expect an attendance of less than 40% of those people that volunteer. They'll say they're coming, and then they'll look out the window in the morning, see it's raining and change their mind. You are in the category where the vast majority of your volunteers are going to turn up, unless somebody's feeling ill, unless somebody gets COVID, unless someone's child's broken a foot. Sorry, I overheard it. Someone's child's broken a foot, so they can't turn up at work. That's fair enough. Our job is not that. If something's wrong, don't walk away. That little thing that you saw might make a difference. Go back to the Titanic, go back to Hillsborough. Hillsborough has 19 causation factors over 7.5, 8 years. Any single person who'd taken one step to prevent any one of those would have prevented the Hillsborough disaster taking place. That's the tragedy. 96, now 97 people died in Hillsborough, but lots of people along the way on a 7-year journey have just said, that doesn't look right. We should do something about it. That's the challenge to all of us, do something about it. I mentioned this, management of health and safety work regulations. That is what tells us we need to do risk assessment. By law, we must do risk assessment. Identify what causes an injury or illness in your business, decide how likely it is that somebody could be harmed, and then take action to either eliminate it or mitigate it down to a tolerable level. Within risk assessment, we never talk about acceptable. Once you've seen as acceptable risk, we talk about tolerable. What can I live with? Can I accept that in a world where we do things and people come to those things, there's always going to be risk. You cannot take all risk away from human beings. You can't. And if people are riding horses, you're never going to take all those risks away. People are always going to fall off horses, and sadly, every year, some people will die falling off horses. Is it a risk that we as a society are prepared to take? Yeah. We'd like to do everything in our power to prevent it, but it's a risk we're prepared to take. Millions of people cycle around the country every day. 3 or 4 people each week will be killed on some cycling accidents. Does that mean we're going to stop people cycling? The highest level of casualties at most sporting events is actually from soccer. Are we going to stop soccer this weekend? Well, we should. Maybe. Take some action to mitigate the risk. Now, the HSE have got, probably all seen this, the 5 basic steps to risk. 1, identify the hazards. So, 1 minute around this room. On the table that you're with, have a look around. What are the hazards in this room? What might hurt us? Not who's going to be hurt or how we're going to be hurt, but what are the things that might hurt us?
Yeah, charges.
Have a good look. You might need to stand up.
The dog.
Why is it
My poor dog.
A dog that I might trip over. Hot water boiler over in the corner. No, I promise I won't. Hot water boiler over in the corner. Is that dangerous?
Yeah.
Could be. Could be. Chair could be a trip hazard on the way out through the door. Projector. I've had a quick look before I walked underneath it and make sure it's bolted solidly in place and the bolts aren't rusting. Anything else that can hurt us in this room?
There's a dog in this room. Did we say dog?
There is a dog in the
Sorry.
room. Yeah.
I'm just telling you there's a dog in the room. We can tread on it. like you.
Well,
You could fall over the.
absolutely.
Might just get massively distracted. Absorb the training.
It would be a bit of a distraction. If a fire alarm went off and we all went, what's that? Oh, there was a big bang. We all jumped up suddenly. That might upset the dog might jump up. We're running for the escape routes and the dog might be in front of us. There's always lots of things around us that could cause us harm. Loads of stuff. But we don't stop doing it or change the way we are. We just look and we identify the risks.
I think it's scary, having you do risk assessments. Is used to walk into a supermarket, and I find it very embarrassing if my children have moved something might fall over it.
Fire exits are my big thing in supermarkets. If you walk out of here now, the next time you go into a supermarket, look how many fire exits are blocked. Almost every single supermarket I go into.
I worked in nightclubs for years, and I find myself consciously now, everywhere I am, I find the exits and entrances, and I'm there.
They're terrible. Nightclubs are some of the worst.
It's awful.
They're much better. I mean, the Americans have had some dreadful fires in nightclubs. There was a nightclub in Milton Keynes just a few years ago where they did a fire inspection, and the manager said, "Yeah, come in. We always unlock the doors. We always push the doors open, swing them open just to make sure everything's working, and then close them before we open the doors to that door." The fire officer said, "Well, that's really interesting because Sainsbury's car park next door re-tarmacked their car park and raised the level of the car by 2 inches. And I know that none of your fire doors on that side will now open." So they went testing, and none of them would open. That car park had been raised 2 years before them. 2 years of running a nightclub where half the doors in the building wouldn't have opened if you don't have fire. But nightclubs, dangerous. I don't like supermarkets though, and they've got worse recently because they're doing so many home deliveries. They weren't built to have that storage space for all that packaging stuff. So they're building piles of deliveries ready to go, and the place they're putting them is the fire exit. When they're not putting them in front of the fire exit, they're quite often just the other side. So even if you tried to push the door open, you wouldn't be able to. There's always tons of stuff. Who's going to be harmed and how? Sorry if I trip over you, because I'm quite big at looking at me now. I know.
Your measure.
If I do trip over you and fall on you, we're both going to get hurt, but probably you more than me. Who's going to be harmed? Well, if it was the boiler, it's probably going to be the one person in the corner. It was a fire alarm and we were all leaving, and we all got squished together, then all of us. We've got to look at who potentially might be harmed. Evaluate the risks. That is probably the most important part. What is the risk of any of us as grown adults burning ourselves on that boiler today? Pretty low. If anybody's going to do it, it's going to be me because I'm close. I'm so clumsy. If anybody's going to burn themselves now, but it could change later on this afternoon because I could bring my 2.5-year-old twin granddaughters in here. So they know that that's a dangerous boiler. And that if they fiddle with that little lever thing, that boiling water's not going to come out of it. Who is going to be affected changes, and we loop back. We've got to start thinking about new hazards now. I'm not quite sure how my daughter's going to react to a dog in the room, or the granddaughters. One of them, I'm pretty sure, is going to freeze, because that's what she does. Anything strange and new, she freezes, hand over arm, and she will not move. Her world record so far is 24 minutes in the presence of strangers, standing perfectly still, doing that, and just refusing to acknowledge that there's anybody else present. I don't think she's at risk. Matilda is going to go and pull her tail. Because that's what she does. Now, that's not going to be nice for the dog or for Matilda, because she might quite likely react to that. The risk has changed because of the people that are present. And we've got to think about that. A normal riding school with adults and children present will be different from an RDA event because the people are different. I never do 2 music concerts the same because the people are different. Whoever the artist is on stage, I've got to treat the audience completely different because they're different people. It's Catherine Jenkins. I'm not expecting a bunch of drunken idiots taking drugs and trying to climb up the ladder. Well, not normally anyway. If it's Tom Jones, I will expect some drunken idiots. They will be slightly older than you would expect for drunken idiots. They ought to know better at that age, but they will get drunk and they'll dance like they did in their 20s. and break their hips. I know Tom Jones concerts normally come with 1 or 2 broken hips. That's normal. So I'm not worried about
their pants off.
most of the underwear comes out of handbags. I'm delighted. He has actually asked people to stop doing that, but they still do it. It comes out of the handbag. But I'm not going to have a tour of security for a Tom Jones concert, but I am going to have appropriate medical because I know the people are going to be different from an electronic dance music therapy, where I know it's all about drugs. And I need a different type of medical. So we're assessing it based on the people as well. I think that third part is really important. Who are the people that are going to be decided? Who's going to be harmed in part 2? And then what are the risks? And then we go again. Because if the people are different this day, then it's going to be different risks and different life. Recording significant findings. Really important word there. Bear in mind this is from the HSE. Significant findings. Do I need to record the fact that the surface, the grass surface, is a little bit uneven and there might be a slip, trip or fall? No, I'd say no, because everybody's walking in and can see it's a big grassy surface. I don't think there's a major risk there. I don't think there's a significant risk that needs to be recorded. We might mention the fact it's an uneven surface, but I certainly wouldn't spend pages talking about how people might be hurt and broken wrists. It's normal everyday life. However, horses moving through an area where the public are is a significant risk. And we know the efforts. I've been on guard duty at the top of the walkway, trying to make sure that there's only horses going in one direction, not the other, and certainly no carriages mixed in with them at the same time. We know it's a significant risk. So we write it down, we review it, and then we take action to try to prevent or to mitigate it. And I stop every single occasion where horses are going to miss mix on the walkway. No, but I'm going to do my damnedest to make sure that doesn't happen. There's always one person that's going to know better than me. There's always one person that's going to say, don't you know who I am? No, I don't, I'm sorry. I was given this yellow jacket and told to wait until the route was clear. Oh, it's okay, I've been around horses all my life. I know best, I'm going to walk down the hill. And what am I going to do? Jump in front of a horse to stop it? No, absolutely not. We will do our best under the circumstances. All that we can do. What even is risk? We look at the threats and the hazards. What are the things that we can go wrong? Boiler in the corner. What's the likelihood of us burning ourselves? Pretty low. If we do burn ourselves, what are the consequences? Well, it's not really nice. You know, nasty blisters if you pour that boiling water over your hand, but are you likely to die from it? Probably not. If my 2.5-year-old was to stand underneath it and press the lever and the boiling water went all over it, that's different. So the likelihood of something happening and the consequences of something happening are then worked out together. Now you'll have saw, does anybody use the grid box, the 3x3 or 5x5 risk assessment matrices? Yeah, and the HSE don't recommend that. You know, a lot of people, a lot of councils like go, so you've got to have a quantifiable risk. Really? What makes it a 3 or a 4 or a 5? If you said to me, there's a crowd of 1,000 people out there, that looks really dangerous, I'd go, 1,000? In Canada in 3 weeks' time, and we're dealing with 800,000. That's our perception of risk is different. So putting a number on it really hard.
I was just wondering, you know, you talk about if there were a bit of incident, you'd have to reflect back on that if you were taking to task about it, there's an investigation going on, and you'd researched your risk and you'd done your own sort of mental assessment, your own internal matrix of how you'd worked out likelihood as well. How would you be asked to prove, to define how you assessed, how you reached the conclusion that you did the level of risk? So when I first started doing this assessment, I used to do matrix, so I used to colour code them to prove that I thought it through using an improved formula. But how easy is it to stand up in court and say, well, actually, I assessed the risk like this through my own methods and my own experience and consulting people? Would that be enough to say, you know, how you reached the decisions that you did about what you deemed as a tolerable level of risk?
Yeah, it would be, because there's a whole bunch of text and case law now. And actually, the people that would support you more than anybody else normally would be the HSE, because your risk tolerance is different today to what it will be. If you have a near miss in your car on the way home this afternoon, you're going to drive more carefully for the next few days, even if it wasn't your fault. You're going to hesitate at junctions, you're going to hesitate at roundabouts. Your tolerance, your perception of risk has changed. Which is why it's really important that we don't take last year's risk assessment and change the date. The world is changing around us. Things are changing around us all the time. We need to be up to date with what those risks are, but our own tolerance and our own perception of that risk will change on a regular basis. At the moment, one of the biggest risk factors for music concerts and events this summer, anybody know what it is? Used to be drugs, alcohol, crushing, crowd issues, even terrorism. At the moment, it's protest. Protesters are coming out. Anywhere where diesel or any type of fuel is being used unnecessarily, they're coming out and they're protesting and chain themselves onto generators and chain themselves onto this. So, because the world has just changed, all of our risk assessments, which have never ever looked at protest, who's going to protest at Glastonbury? Now, it is the friend of the left, and it is very, very pro all those things. But they know they're getting protested at Glastonbury this year because they're burning thousands and thousands of litres of fuel just for the purposes of entertainment. And in the view of some of our protest groups, that's not acceptable. Glastonbury should be cancelled. Unless you can use it and run it all on solar and wind power, there should be no Glastonbury. Now, they are a tiny, tiny percentage of people. It's only going to take half a dozen of them to turn up and chain themselves to significant places to cause huge trouble. So our tolerance and the world event will change the way we look at risk. So take it out. I mean, the way I do it is I get last year's Luton Carnival we've got coming up in a couple of months' time. Take out last year's risk assessment, change it all to red, and literally go through one section at a time and go, that's the same. That is, oh, hang on a minute, no, that's now changed. That's now changed. I'm not quite sure how much it's changed. So I'm going to change that to blue. That's the same, that's the same, that's the same. Those three I'm happy to leave in black. So I change them back from red to black, and then I go back through and I change them one at a time. You need to demonstrate that you've revisited the risk assessment based on your perception. Your risk tolerance for someone falling off a horse and killing themselves at 2022 championships would change your risk assessment for 2023 because you would all be a different place. There's an old phrase they say, no man crosses the same river twice, because he's not the same man and it's not the same river. Everything about you that happens to you changes your perception and your outlook. But every set of circumstances is different as well. I don't know what's happened down at Harvard. I don't know if they've done a ton of building work. I don't know if the site's changed. I don't know if the management's changed. Everything about that site now we need to treat as new. And we're different people because we've just come through COVID. And one of the things I'll talk about right at the very end is people's behaviours have changed. Some people are still really uncomfortable being in crowds. Other people just want an excuse to go out and enjoy themselves. We've got some quite extremes of behaviour taking place. So the people that come into your event might be quite different. They'll be the same people, but they might behave quite differently this year to what we've seen in 2019. The reason I say that is because we've seen it at every single event, not just in the UK, US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. People are coming to events and behaving differently to the way they ever have before. The most common one is intolerance. People are impatient. People don't like being asked even to, would you mind just stepping aside? Would you mind just, if I was predicting now, working on that walkway where the horses go around the back of the stall, I would say probably twice or three times as many people this year will be reluctant to follow that advice because that's what we're seeing at every other one. I don't know, but it's likely. So our likelihood versus consequence, and we work it out. And I don't go numerical, except in those council areas where they insist I do. Have you all seen the 3x3 or 5x5 people? I've got some councils that still insist on that. Some police forces that still insist on it. But basically what I'm saying to myself is, what is the likelihood, the probability? Is it low, medium and high, low, medium or high? And what's the consequence? Is the consequence a sprained finger or is the consequence a broken knee? Is the consequence fatality? Is the consequence a multiple fatality? And we'll grade them. And if I've got low likelihood of something happening, a low consequence, what are we going to do no more about it? Very unlikely I'm going to do anything about it. But if I'm coming out with a high likelihood, high probability, and high consequence, I've got to do something. Because that means it's almost certainly going to happen, and it's almost certainly going to hurt somebody really badly. That's not good enough. We've got to change it. We've got to try and bring that down. That's the simplest table that we use sometimes. And we literally go along, what the consequence, what the likelihood. And if you're red, you're in that bottom right-hand corner, or in the two boxes next to it, probably need to be thinking about how can I shift it down to amber or down to green. You'll notice there is no zero on any of the grids. You can never say never. You can never say nothing is never going to happen. You simply can't say that. So it's always low, medium, high. Sometimes people go very low or low to medium, so you can spread it out to 5 each way, medium to high and high. This is a grid I will give you if you haven't seen this one before. It'll be on the PDFs. If you are using 5-box system, which I prefer, because I think low, medium, high, a little bit too simplistic, but it works for some people. I go on the 5-box system. Is there less than a 5% chance of it? Well, says who? This is back to your point, and according to the law, I think you assess it was 4 or 6%. I didn't. It was a guide. It felt to me like the likelihood of this thing happening was so low. It was below 5. But it was based on my gut feeling and my previous experience. And then you just scale it up accordingly. You do the same for what's the outcome, depends on the event. Multiple deaths or large numbers of very serious injuries, likely at the RDA champs. Multiple deaths, unless it was a terrorist attack. Likelihood of a terrorist attack at the champs.
Not attached, because we're also
Now, actually, I've forgotten, I hadn't put this on the slides, but you make a really good point. The number of heart attacks at football stadium every year averages 2 to 3 a year. This year they're on 27. In the stands, not on the pitch, on the stands. They're saying we're deconditioned. We are not used to doing this stuff. We've sat indoors for a long time. Some of us have suffered the consequences of sitting around and not being as physically active as we might have been. We put weight on generally as a nation. They're doing a survey at the moment. It's looking like 7%. 7% increase in body weight across the UK. So we're out of condition, we're overweight, we're not used to being excited, we're not used to physical strenuous exercise. now in May, June, July and August, we're all going to go back out to play and have a great time in sunshine. Medical issues, the Grand National, we haven't got the results yet, but the Cheltenham Gold Cup, 40% increase in medical issues at the treatment centres, 60% increase people calling for ambulances, and a 92% increase in the number of people that ended up in hospital. Cheltenham. Yeah, we've just got the Gold Cup results today, and the entry will be through next week. There's a group called NEMAG, the National Association of Medicine Advisory, National Events Medical Advisory Council, that are doing all the work on this. And the increase in medical issues will be worth thinking about. Champs, have a look at your medical plan. Medical teams, qualified competent medical teams, will know that this is a problem. They're already saying, they're coming to organisers and saying we're going to have to increase our medical facilities by 50%. Go, why? Why am I having to pay more? Well, why? But ideally, they'll be coming to you and saying we might need a bit more medical this year. They'll certainly ask them the question. And if they don't know what you're talking about, put me in touch with them last week, because they should know what you're talking about. Who do you use down there? Is it a local company?
No, we use a company from around here.
Can't,
Yeah, off the top of my head, I can't remember the name, but
They
yeah,
should be aware of
they're
this
around here. They're company based around
Yeah.
here.
I mean, all the medical companies and sort of websites, apps, LinkedIn, they're all talking about it. They're all now going back to the promoters, the organisers, and saying we're going to need more staff, which we need more money, and organisers and promoters haven't got any more money. For us in the music industry, most of the tickets for events this year were sold in 2019. That money has gone. That money's been spent. And now we're trying to put on this event in 2022 against the background of very little equipment, supply chains that are broken, staffing shortages, and suddenly they've got the money to do it. It's going to be interesting.
Some of these medical issues at events, like related to mental health, like anxiety and panic attacks, that being out and about and that sort of thing, or are they more physical issues?
They're presenting as physical issues. I don't think they've finessed sufficiently because it's only in the last 3 weeks it's really come to light, and particularly when the races started. We knew it was a problem for the football, but I don't think they've managed to get down into the granular detail. Of course, there are issues because as soon as they leave the ground and go to hospital, nobody at the hospital will ever tell you the outcome because it's patient confidentiality. And that's why the medical teams are doing it and then giving us just very broad figures. They're not telling us the real detail. I don't think they're at that level of detail yet. I think you're right.
I'm just thinking for our participants who are, perhaps more vulnerable, may not have gone out so much in the past 2 years as everybody else. Are they going to get to the champs and be so overwhelmed by
It's a really good point, actually, because I think you could be sort of the extreme example of how this might be the case, because proportionally speaking, more of your people will have been in isolation, won't they? Including volunteers, not just the riders and their families. They may have spent more time in isolation than the majority of people. It's a really good point, actually. I think it's worth thinking about. I'm not sure what to do about it and be prepared. But if a lot of this that's presenting as collapses, fainting, and heart attacks is actually mental health generated or psychologically generated, yeah, I think you could be an extreme example of that. We are definitely seeing people turn up at events excited and then not wanting to be mixing with other people. They are, well, hang on a minute, I thought I was going to be okay, but I'm not. I want more space. The other more you can space things out. Dawn, so.
I don't know if it's possible, but could there be a room or place aside?
I was just thinking that the quiet corner.
Yeah, just set aside as a quiet.
Yeah, we can.
Have you got any mental health?
Maybe designated listeners or something. Yeah.
There's loads of classrooms upstairs all
Mental health is a wider issue in mind at the moment. So they might have
That's why they
suggestions. I just think given the first aid.
Yeah, and I was thinking that maybe like if there's people who are good trained listeners or something, wondering for quiet narrative work.
Yeah. I think a quiet room is probably useful.
Yeah.
If there is some way if there is anybody in the organisation that's done the mental health and first aid training, I don't know whether anybody's done that.
Our new chief exec is a Samaritan's listener, so he might have useful connections.
Has he got other? I was going to say, has he got other jobs on the day? He might be a little bit busy, but if he's got connections, he might be able to help. And it is an issue in the events industry as a whole. We've actually lost more people to suicide in the last 2 years than we have to COVID, which is quite scary. I've lost more friends to suicide than COVID because a lot of my friends were in the events. But again, they had no work for 2 years. And a lot of them, I wouldn't say they live hand to mouth, but they live this travelling existence around the world, following music. Some of them haven't even got homes. You know, they get back to England and rent a property for a couple of months, and then they're back on the road for 2 months, and then suddenly everything's taken away. I think that idea of mental health first aid and a quiet room is really good. Sorry, you had your hand up.
No, absolutely. It was about mental health first aid. I just thought actually perceptioning, I think it'd be a really good thing for us to do, given the fact that we're doing quite a lot of focus with part of our new strategy onto mental health and supporting people with that. We've done a lot of work on that behind the scenes. I think that would be well reflected at the challenges. I was also saying having a darkened dream is quite useful for people with autism as well if they've had a sensory overload, so they've got somewhere to go and debrief. Speaking to a couple of parents, I know they say that they're young adults now, but if they say if they come to an event, they'll do well at that event, but the next couple of days they've literally got to lock themselves away because they've over-processed and have become quite anxious about it. They've eat too soon, should we say. So just somewhere like a respite area would be really useful.
Yes, good idea. And there's the same for the rest of us as well, because you will build to a crescendo, to a peak during the course of the build in the week before, and then that weekend, and then on Monday morning, we all kind of crash. We're exhausted physically, but we're also exhausted mentally. The events industry rides a roller coaster of mental health in terms of people are fantastic until the end of the show. As soon as the show ends, they fall off the edge of a cliff. If they've got another show to look forward to, they look towards, they're okay. But when there's nothing left, that's when the real serious stuff comes in. Yeah, good points. Thank you very much. I'm just going to finish up this really quickly. That's what my risk assessments for councils end up looking like. What was the problem? What was the issue? I've got a policy in place for dogs, but what if a dog gets out of control? So out of control. No, if you're looking at me anymore, that one. What are the risks? What are the likelihoods and the consequences? And the outcome risk is an A, and this is out of the 5x5 matrix. See, is there anything I can do about it? Yes, I can put this mitigation in place. Have I reduced the risk? Have I reduced the likelihood? Can I reduce the risk of something falling from a high building on a building site? Yes, I can make sure there's proper netting. I can make sure that people are there holding briefs. I can make sure people are wearing their harnesses so the heavy thing falling off the building isn't a builder. I do that all the time. So I can reduce the risk or likelihood of it happening, but I can also reduce the consequence because I can insist that everybody that's working down here wears hard hats and steel toe caps. So if it is nut or a bolt or a spanner or a small tool, it lands on the middle of their head, they kind of go, ouch, rather than ouch. So you can reduce both in different ways. That's what we're trying to achieve. Quick examples, and I'll just put these. That's my favourite petrol generators on event sites. They still turn up on event sites. Is there a risk of petrol generators exploding when they're being refueled or while running hot? Yes, absolutely, because petrol fumes will catch fire just on heat, not necessarily on the spark. How long does it take the generator to cool down once it's been burning? Anything up to 40 minutes, petrol generator. So if you leave it to stand still, 20 minutes and everything's going to be okay, it may not be. So it's a high likelihood it happens quite often based on our knowledge on websites. Every single year there will be around about 7 or 8 petrol generators which will catch fire and explode. About half of those people will be injured. It just happens, it happens all the time. Consequence, depending on the size of the generator and how close people are, is high because it could be death. If someone was actually refueling at the time when it exploded, it probably would end up with fatality on very, very serious injuries. What can I do about it? We send warning letters in advance to tell people that they're not allowed to use them. We monitor the site to make sure that even though we've told them not to, they still turn up with them, because sometimes they do, and then we take action. If I've decided that it's a high-risk activity with a potential fatality, and then someone turns up with a generator and I do nothing about it, I'm in trouble. I've written it down, I identified it, said don't do it, and then you did. I saw you do it, but I didn't do anything to stop you doing it. It's on my shoulders. That's what I say when we write risk assessments, we have to be careful for ourselves as well. We can't write down stuff that A, is impractical, B, we can't deliver, or have someone as a team that can't deliver. So if you write that down and then don't deliver it, you're bringing risk to yourself. And we could go so far as one of our councils do. They have half a dozen standby diesel generators in the back of the van. And if people turn up with petrol generators, you were warned about that. If you ever do that again, you will not come back to this event site. Turn up with petrol generators next year, you will not be coming to this event site. But for today, the price of £25 plus a £200 deposit. Amazing how many of these actually disappear. The £25 and £200 deposit, you can use our diesel generator. We will put your petrol generator in the back of our van as part of the deposit. It's a method to make it.
Do you think we should put something out there? Because people do bring generators with autobots, so should we need to put something out there so they don't bring petrol?
Yes. The HSE haven't made it law yet, but they have made it very, very strong advice. And that goes back to 2015. So it's been around 7 years now with them saying petrol generators.
I think it's quite visibly, it's quite easy to distinguish between them. It sounds really silly to think about between these and when they arrive on site. Yeah, how would the lay person go, that's a petrol generator, or that's a diesel one, it's fine? Are they required to be labelled?
They are labelled.
Yeah, so
it's actually really hard to take the labels off. If someone's taken the label off, it's probably because it's petrol and they didn't want to notice.
You can smell the difference.
You can smell the difference in the fuel. That's the way I would check. If I wasn't sure, I'd just say, when we step away from the generator, where's your 5 gallon, where's your 5 litre top up tank that you're top of your fuel today? Before we go away, we have a smell. You can smell the difference. If you really, really want to be dramatic, tip a little bit out and floor and step back, step forward to it, because you can throw a match on diesel if you want to catch fire. You could put a wick on diesel and floor, it will catch fire because it needs extreme heat and pressure to actually fire up, whereas petrol, or you don't have to put petrol on the floor, you stand back and you'll still get a big push coming towards you. I wouldn't do that, I certainly wouldn't recommend that. Please don't.
So surely whenever they go to horse events in their lorry or their school, and they've got one, they'll be stopped using it.
They should be, but they're not. Who from local authorities, fire, police or ambulance, do you ever see on any of your horse events?
Well, you see people like Harold.
Do you stop them using petrol generators?
I will now.
The problem with diesel generators is they're more expensive, and we shouldn't even be selling petrol generators. We can still go and buy petrol generators. If someone turns up and they absolutely insist on using it or need to use it, there are some very basic precautions, like don't have the fuel anywhere near the storage fuel anywhere near the generator. If the generator is one side of the horse box, make sure that the fuel storage is the other side of the horse.
Yeah, to be fair, most in the lorries, everyone, I thought everyone plugged in anyway, because there's electric hookup. So, but it's like, I just thought it's like the burger van people and the coffee van.
Burger vans and coffee vans still using petrol generators now. They will shoot.
Yeah, they shouldn't be, because I wouldn't have thought, but.
I'm gonna look when
Yeah.
That is exactly what this is about. It's things that for me are so obvious because I've been doing it for so long, but sharing with you makes you think, oh, you know, I never thought about that. But now you know about it, you will do it. There's a little piece of our brain, any psychologists in the room. There's a tiny little piece of our brain right the way back here. It's called the reticular activation system. Once you turn it on to something, you can't stop looking at it. If I said to you, when was the last time you saw a red Nissan? No.
I actually was behind one all the way up.
You remember that? You
That's
probably
really
remember.
fun.
What's the chance of that? But if I said to you now, I guarantee when you leave here today, on your drive home, you're probably going to see about 20 red Nissans. Because I've just told you, and I've just flicked that little switch in your reticular activation system that makes you look for red Nissans. It's the same as when you go to buy a car. What sort of car do you fancy buying next? Oh, a white Freelander, because there's not that many of them around. But as soon as you make that decision, consciously think about the white Freelander, every other car on the road will be a white Freelander, and you suddenly change your mind about what car you select. Activating your reticular activation system to look out for things like petrol generators is exactly what the podcast today is about. It's just to get those bits of brain working together. I'm sure Eric said something about petrol generators, and that says petrol on the side, and that is a green 5 litre petrol can right next to it. People tend to use black petrol cans for diesel, sometimes red, but normally black. If it's red or green, it's almost sometimes petrol, and sitting next to the actual container, you've got a problem. If that's sitting next to, and they won't even think about it. They won't even think that it's sitting next to their £100,000 horse box with their horse that they love dearly inside that they will never ever be able to rescue if that thing goes bang. You won't get anywhere near that horse box. And if you put it in those terms, you realise how explosive generators are. Why don't you move it away from the horse boxes? And can we separate the petrol away from that? If you do nothing else other than that, you've done a big step forward. And that is what we call dynamic risk assessment. Simple as that. You didn't write it down because you never thought it would be likely to happen. It's not been included in the written risk assessment, but you've seen it and now you're going to call it out. You're going to do something about it. If you see it, do that assessment yourself. Think of what the risks are to you, think of what the risks are to other people. And then do something. If it's safe. If you think the person that you're going to about to speak to is just going to give you a hard time and rip into you, then report it to someone who they know. I don't know anybody at the chance who's going to walk up to Anne and say, do one, it's none of your business. I know that, right? I've seen Anne perform at the Champs. I'm not sure there's anybody on that side that's going to walk up and say, it's none of your business, mind your own business, go away.
I pay to see that. I get popcorn on the inside.
I pay to see what comes next. Find a person. If you're not comfortable and confident, not all of us comfortable and confident can go up to them and say, excuse me, just notice that. Just go and find someone who is. You don't have to call it out yourself. Go and find somebody else who is, if it's safe. One thing I would say, if you get the chance, if you're going to report it to the office, you're going to report it to someone, best thing you can do, take a quick picture. Who uses WhatsApp? Who use WhatsApp on the phones? Yeah, or text. Take a picture and say, I've got problems, petrol generator, look at it, it's right next to this horse box registration, such and such, which is, you just told the story. You've just told the story in a couple of pictures. The easiest way to do it. But whatever you do, make sure you report it and then make a note of it so we can pick it up for learning next time around.
Why don't you just put it on the thing?
Yeah, no.
I think it's worth it. I mean, we're putting it on the standard now on all our letters too, especially, but it is especially to coffee vendors, to burger vans. Burger vans may well be running on propane, which is fine, but they need to be, that propane gas cylinder needs to be external and in a safe, secure, caged area.
I think and barbecues as well, that's the other thing you do see.
Yeah.
With those boxes.
You don't have any camping now then?
Yes.
Yes.
Some sharp
Those little barbecues, yeah, people didn't line around to cool down and night time and the person coming back. Perhaps someone who might just have had a couple of minutes somewhere else, go back to the tent, trade on those things. Yeah, I don't like those little barbecues, but even the big barbecues. If you get a cold night, people still now pull the barbecue inside the tent to keep them warm. Gets really freezing, the big barbecue and put it on inside. We lose on average 5 people a year get from carbon monoxide poisoning in tents. Not on events like we've got out campsites. 5, 6 people a year. Right, any questions on basic coffee break?
Yeah.
22, let's say 10 to, and then we'll come back and we'll just do another hour. Grab a coffee.
Something
Bring back suggestions, we'll start. So, good, I hope so.
You didn't mention the disco risk assessment.
Saturday night disco?
Yeah, we think of the championships, what do you think about? Disco, camping, tents.
All I would say is anybody who goes to the Saturday night disco probably shouldn't be driving one of those little buggies the next morning.
Yeah, that's the thing, isn't it?
Because there'll be other
Yeah,
Loving job, right?
you almost need 2 people, like, to, don't you think it is actually, to be fair, it's getting to a point where the person ought to be paid, really. Yeah, I can't, yeah. Yeah. I don't, you can't pause this, can you? Just leave it recorded. Sure, there's a root tea back there.
So I can stay with risk assessment. Eating risk assessment, how does that work? Or is it all one thing?
I don't actually know. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I was on call overnight, so I can't first thing this morning. Delayed. Change it. Some things with the grass growing or going out to new fields or I was worried about one. That's right. It might be
Oh, good, Chill's gonna
yes.
Yes, good, thank you. Yes, yeah. Yes, that's what I'm just thinking. So much. All the things that we've.
I don't know anybody who's turn someone away from minor infringement. But equally,
and also I need to learn how to use
shades of grey, doesn't it? And if they're not successful, missed the vaccine entirely, that's a bigger risk than we were we can. But it's hard to define all those possibilities of what's acceptable and what's not. So my gut feeling was sort of the official policy states the same, but there is yeah, sort of what I was feeling. Right, opening themselves up to that sort of grey area. Yeah, and I guess the VHA changed their vaccine. Now the Brexit government saying go to your vaccine 6 months to do.
make sure
And I sat on the and they're very much of the vaccine to 2 drinks,
Oh, good.
They're all tiny. Well, you see, you've got the movie.
Cup of tea.
No, coffee.
Yes, I'm just sort of thinking.
Because the expectation is there that everyone knows.
Well, a lot of it is common sense.
There's probably a bit more
But yeah, yeah, I think we've been pretty good. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's
And a bigger part is the
yeah. Although they do try and help. Yeah. So when so you're going on the 4th, do you need me to come along? Quite like to come, so is it? But it makes sense if I do come. Right in the corner. Yeah, I'll send to England as I call it. I'll not call it. You're down I'll be beforehand before the event, yes. That's the Thursday before it starts Friday. Yes, I will. Yes, I do. Oh, yes, we could walk through things. The list that I gave you
Fiona, there's just things about positioning on the tech, stuff like that. The biggest one was the mounting area, really, because that really was. The trouble is, yes, no, it wasn't that, it was the traffic in and out. It was stopping people going across, and at one point Mark became a huge great big vehicle and emptied their donkey right at the wrong time. That sort of thing. So hopefully we can ask, would you mind not clearing? Is that on the it's on the list, it's on the this yours or yes, this yours. Well, there was one, I sent one through on a, is that yours or is it no. I sent it through on the one, it's to feed just on an email, and then I think Pauline's reiterated it as well, so it is around. But it was really making, if possible, making a walkway. But then that's the sort of thing, Anne, that we can do on a Thursday, and if the ground crew are around, getting the ground crew to give us more barriers, plastic barriers, so I understand what you're saying about the coach, it's everybody's responsibility for the actual mounting and dismounting, but it was really just keeping the buggies and the dogs so that people separate. Well, what we've done was what and really not makes it all up. No, they're not. No. Keeping it safe. Yes. I mean, when they submit all their forms, it should say as soon as they put in place, surely they must do their own business. Yeah, you know what we've got. Yeah.
Okay, ladies and gents, you can start taking your seats.
To be continued. Yes.
That's all right. That's all right. We're gonna have a quick whiz.
How's things with you? Yeah, no, absolutely fine. Now it's all very busy. Yeah, we've got no shows. Will be done by video. Yeah, I mean, I know separate problems. I do know you're going to do that. Face to face. Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, well done.
Yeah. Hey guys. Yes.
Okay, what I want to do quickly is to flick through your own interview procedures. Now, what I should have done is checked, have they been rewritten in the last 6 months or so? Please tell me they haven't.
No, they haven't.
Good,
I thought you were going to say, please tell me they have. I was like, no. Well, no.
And all I want to do is just create it as some talking points. You should all know these procedures in place. I always say any emergency procedures should have a bigger folder on the top of a drawer in the control room with a big banner across them saying, in the event of emergency, do not read these. Because if that's the first time you're looking at them, it's a bit late. You don't need to know the details. Someone should know where to grab them, go through them, just, have we done that, have we done that, have we done that, have we done that? Yes. But if you're going to the emergency procedures, when there's an emergency, you're all going to be busy with something else. The first time you're thinking about what does the emergency procedure say, when the emergency is occurring, a little bit later in the day. So we're going to have a quick look through them, particularly around initial response. Now I had to squeeze these onto the slide, so apologies. Can everybody read those?
Yeah.
But don't forget, you're going to get them as PDFs. And I'll make sure they're big enough so that you can read them on the screen if you need to. First priority, every time, no matter what the situation is, you look after yourself. You've got to, otherwise you are no good to anybody else. If you are putting yourself in harm's way, because there's a horse running around crazy and you're trying to jump in front of it and get a front hoof in your forehead, you're now another problem. You're no longer part of the solution. Don't put yourself in harm's way unless you are super confident, know exactly what you're doing, and have already told somebody else that there's a problem. So at least there's somebody on the way to fix it. If you are standing solo, knowing there's a problem, and you then get knocked unconscious, we've got a much bigger problem. But look after yourself first. Prioritise your own safety. Whatever means of communication you've got, be it radio, be it a WhatsApp group. Now, most events now are having these WhatsApp groups. How many, I just did ask before, how many people use WhatsApp? Good, so the vast majority. It's a really useful little tool. The great thing about WhatsApp as well is that it can keep a log. You can open WhatsApp on a laptop, and you can then download all the messages and all the photographs and things that people have exchanged with the event. You've got an automatic running log of events and exactly what time they happen. We use them as an alternative for logs quite often sometimes. So if you're using WhatsApp, if not, if it's on the radio, someone needs to make a quick note of what's happened. And the basic things you want to know is, what is it, where is it, what do you need? They're the things I'm going to ask you. If I'm in the control room and you say, I've got a problem, I'm going to say, where are you first? Because if I hear nothing else, at least I know where to send help to. What's the problem? What do you need? They're the main things that you're going to be asking for. So notify the Secretary's office and make sure somebody else is aware of it. Briefly describe what's taking place and how you need an extra. Do you need fire? Do you need police? Do you need ambulance? Have you got a situation? Or is it just extra staff? Chalet. Now, chalet is the mnemonic, that's an easy word to say, it's a mnemonic. Stop. That's what we used to use. Now, if you are comfortable using chalet and you've all been using it for a while, stick with it, is what I would say. It tells you, have I got casualties? Are there any hazards? I mean, particularly, if it was falling power lines, or there's a horse still running, horse loose that's still running around and is really upset about something. The best way for people to get in, access, exactly where are you, the emergency service that you might need, or the backup you might need, exactly what type of incident. Now, that is the model that they used to use. I'm not that ignorant because I think the location comes first. Every time. I actually don't need to know what your problem is until I need to know where you are first. Tell me where you are, at least I can get something to you. They've moved out now, and all the emergency services are moving on to this thing called Chester. And they've got rid of Chalet, or what used to be Sad Chalet, and replaced it with another system now. They are prioritising things and calling them under the ethane system. Now, that's methane, but the M is the emergency services declaring a major incident, which you wouldn't be doing. So you will start at the E. Choose to use this model, you'll start at the E for methane. Exact location. Where are you? Not so much on that event site, although it could be useful. Does anybody use this thing called What Three Words? Yeah. I love What Three Words, because you can go, up. All right, that's where it says I am. So 3 strange words called apple, horse, donkey. And I can share that immediately with somebody else, and I can share it on WhatsApp. And for those that don't use it, What Three Words, if you stood here now and press the What Three Words button on your phone, if you downloaded the app, free, press the button, it'll give you 3 words. Anybody in the world who puts those words into their phone will know within 5 square metres where you are. For horse riders across country, going off on their own, trotting around, I think it's brilliant. Cyclists use it, riders use it. You do happen to end up the horse out of control, cantering across the field, throwing you off, the horse has gone, you're on the floor in the middle of the field with an injury, still access your phone. Press that button, share it immediately with the emergency service. They know within 5 square metres, anywhere in the world where you are. Brilliant.
Is it worth, I'm sure you've been doing this already, because you've been using what words, but us having some pre-printed cards at various points on the site. So if someone doesn't have the app, they haven't got a phone around, they're prompted by the emergency service. They can say where they were.
Yeah, I've seen that.
I mean, not
quite a lot just recently.
not necessarily
where-
a chance, but just thinking in terms of.
People are using the QR code that does what through was on there. So if you've got a QR reader on your phone, which again is a free app, you can go put it and it tells you exactly where you are. What through was sorry.
For our particular championship, we've all got radios, and we all know where Arena 5 is. You know, that I would have thought that was much easier in our scenario.
Yeah, I was thinking just general settings.
You all know, although I did overhear a conversation at break there as to how many, if any, new volunteers you're going to need for this trip. If you're going to be bringing new people in who will be less familiar, I always give them a map and do the walk around in the morning so they do know the site. But if there are people that don't know the site particularly well, or if they've been called off to a particular part of the site that's not used very much, people are less familiar with, it's a good backup. I wouldn't use it as a primary source of communication on location. I'd much rather say I'm at the main doors of Arena 5. I don't need to know within 5 square metres where people are. I'm inside Arena 5, I'm outside Arena 5. You know where you are, and the controller will know exactly where you are. Stick with that.
And the ambulance will hit, you know, the guys here, and they come, somebody's fallen off, for example. So
Bear in mind, you've got a new medical company this year.
They're not new. They're not new. They're,
Oh, sorry, no, they're not new.
yeah, they're not. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, they're
So
not.
they'll be familiar with the site.
Yeah, they know.
Familiar with the site, but having not worked it for 3 years. So we're
Yeah.
all, you know, treat ourselves as all being a little bit rusty and then give ourselves a bit of a break.
Excuse me, just what 3 words work on that?
Yes. I'm on Android. I've never switched to iPhones. I don't get them. I understand.
And so it works without Wi-Fi as well?
It works without anything. It's working on satellites. Yeah, the only problem is once you've got the exact location, if you haven't got Wi-Fi or mobile phone signal, you just can't share it with anybody. But even without mobile and Wi-Fi, it will give you. And what they suggest is, if you're in the middle of the field, injured, pick the what through words, share it with someone, you know, having somebody, you know, family or friend, press the button. It may not go straight away, but 3, 4, 5 minutes later, you might just get that little boost of the signal, and that will then send that message. The other tip that they always suggest now is if you've got virtually no signal on your phone, you can get through to your answer phone system. If you're on the floor stranded, get through to your own answer phone system, record your message, say, I've fallen from my horse. I am at, what 3 words, blah, 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 in the middle of this area. Even if you've got no signal for half an hour, anybody who's trying to ring you because she's not back at the stables yet, will phone and go, oh, I've got an answer phone message that says she's at such and such and such. So if you can record that message, if you've got any signal at all to be able to record that message, and do it rather than being so. And we've had a tragic case near us about 4 years ago with a lad who crashed into a ditch, and the car, back of the car was sticking out of the ditch, and everybody drove past it. 4 days. And he died of hypothermia because he was wasting every more 4 days. Everybody just assumed everybody else. It's so obvious that this car's sticking out of the ditch. Somebody must have dealt with it. Don't even want to think how many ambulances, fire engine, or police cars drove past. It's on the main road between Southern and Banbury, and it's a major road. But well, I just sat there. And people have been ringing him, he was conscious for those 2.5 days. So if he had just been able to leave an answer phone message, he got a bar of signal, change his answer phone, he'd been able to tell him where it was. Exact location, type of incident, what are the hazards, what are the likely hazards? Got a loose horse still, loose horses being spooked by a low-flying aircraft or whatever, the horse is still loose in the field without a rider. What's the best way to get in, the access? How many casualties? Because you might not just one, you know, if the burger van does blow up. We have about 5 ice cream vans catch fire every single year on events. If they go pop, then it's going to be half a dozen people. What are you asking for? What are the number of casualties and their condition? what sort of state are they in, and then do you need the emergency services, and if so, what? So that's the new model now. Ethane or methane is the one, the emergency services. And when you dial 999, that is the sort of thing they're expecting to hear now. What is your situation? If you go, I'm going to give you the ethane situation, they'll know exactly what, they'll press the button actually, and it opens up on their computers, and they're expecting location targets. You can't officially declare a major incident, but if you dial 999 and said, I am at the scene of a just occurred major incident, they will automatically go into asking these questions. They'll say, wait, where are you? Wait, what's happened? For instance, wait, are there any terrorists still running around with guns, or are there still gas cylinders? What are the other hazards? So they will go into that mode straight away. Initial responding, avoid personal details of the phone. We all know that, particularly for missing persons, but especially for injured people. If somebody's fallen off a horse, if you know who it is, try and avoid putting it out. I much prefer, if the opportunity arises, if funds permit, for people to have earpieces with their radios. So the public aren't hearing what's going on, but a lot of people are really uncomfortable with earpieces, especially the E-ring plastic ones that cut into your ears. But it does prevent the inadvertent sharing of information that you might not want to share.
Ground crew use those, don't
They are, for the sake of the radio is going to cost £7 or £8, and quite often these things are 50 pence extra for each radio. They're a better way of.
they? I'll order some more.
Make sure you protect the dignity of the people involved. Certainly, if somebody's injured, fallen off a horse, we do whatever we can to look after those people. Beware. Does anybody work in the media or have families work in the media? Good. So I can say what I like about them.
Yeah.
They're scum. They are horrible, horrible people who will do whatever they can to get the scoop of tomorrow's newspaper. The Manchester Morning, a woman, not just one, several, took phone calls at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning saying, is your son back from work yet? No, who are you? Oh, I'm just a concerned member of the public, or it's from the police here. You are aware your son's a security guard with Showsec, is that right? Is he working at Manchester Arena tonight? Yeah. Have you heard from him? Because there's been a big bomb and a lot of people are dead. And that was the first the families knew that their kids, their children, had been involved in the Manchester bombing. And the media found them up pretending to be people that they weren't. They are just not nice people. They will say, the public has the right to know everything's going on. It doesn't have the right to know if it's invading somebody else's privacy. So be careful what you say to them. If it's a good friend, one thing, but if it's just a member of the public who is concerned for the welfare of the person on the floor, just be careful what you say. Listen to your radios. If you popped your earpiece out or you've turned your radio down, but you know something's going on, if you see other people around the site suddenly running around, make sure your radio volume is at a level that you can hear, because if you've not heard something already and everybody else has, it's probably because you either switched to another channel. Oh, is that confession? Was it finger pointing? That was itself finger pointing. We all do it. You know, some of the sites that we work on, there's 24 channels. And can you switch over to channel 7? Yeah. Can you switch to channel 15? Yeah. And then sometimes you forget to go back onto the working channel, and suddenly you're looking around going, a lot of people suddenly seem very busy. What have I missed? Or somebody's running towards you going, turn your ears on, turn your ears on. We all do it. We all make mistakes. If you see activity, and you've not heard anything on the radio, just make sure you're on the right channel and then your volume's up. Somebody walks over to you and something's got really loud in your earpiece or really loud on the radio, somebody comes over and asks you directions. You turn the volume down. You naturally do it. Always remember to turn it back up again afterwards. I try and make a habit. I look like a teapot sometimes on the event site, because if somebody comes and asks me a question, I turn the volume down, but I leave my hand there until they walk away. So I'm walking around the event site like that. Try to remember to turn it back up again afterwards. Try to keep everyone calm. We're not doing a crowd psychology session, otherwise the next hour and a half we'll be talking about the concept of panic, how we have been missold what panic is. Trying to keep people calm in emergencies actually isn't the problem. It's trying to make them realise there's an emergency, they need to move. 9 times out of 10, in fact, about 97% of people in the world suffer from something called normalcy bias. We try to explain something really bad that's just happened with a rational explanation. People like me and you never die in terrorist attacks or house fires or building collapses. We don't, right to the point that we do. We try, and our brains try and explain something. So when there is an emergency, even if it's a really obvious emergency, you might be asking people to leave and be like, well, what's the problem? What, how do I see what the... You might need to encourage them in a firm, fair way, preferably without swearing, but if you need to swear, you might do that. We quite often say to security, if it's a real emergency, I'm saying now to the radio, evacuate and evacuate now, whatever it takes, whatever it takes. If that means shouting, swearing, and pushing people towards the exit, then that's what we'll be doing. Probably not going to do. I can't think of any situation in your circumstances where that's going to happen, unless somebody says the arena's just started creaking and we can see bits of the roof falling off. We need to evacuate really quickly. That's about the only circumstances I can imagine where that can be going. Get out, get out, get out. Don't worry about people panicking. Don't worry about that. Or if they panic and they all get crushed in the doorway, because they'll be sitting there, oh, that's a bit weird. How unusual. They won't be moving at all. You might be the one to say, now move. What happens now when anything happens?
But the motivating people stand and watch.
Yeah, and they film it. And they live broadcast now. You know, we've had terrorist shootings that have been live broadcast on Facebook. We don't want people live broadcasting while you're treating the rider, which is fallen off a horse. Have a look around, and if there are people standing filming, that's one time I would say, I don't care how uncomfortable you are, just walk up and say, excuse me, that's someone's son, daughter, brother, sister. Would you mind giving them a little bit of dignity? If they get upset about that, that's their problem, not yours. If you have to do that, maybe have a chat with security as well. I'm just going up to speak to someone who's filming treatment of the person on the floor. Now, the person might say, I'm the mother, father, daughter. So why are you, if you're the mother, father, daughter, why don't I take you over so that you can be by their side rather than standing there filming? I can't imagine standing 50 yards away watching one of my daughters being treated on my phone, just for posterity. It's just I've got a record of it on my phone. Do it. Yeah, maybe the insurance.
There's a safeguarding element as well, I think, for minors. It's covered by quite our robust safeguarding policy anyway. We've got grounds on that.
We say never admit liability, and that's true. We don't. We just can't admit liability because if everybody says what happened, you say, "Oh, I'm sorry, we had the jumps too high." You're just opening up a horrible door for the insurance company. Just don't say it was our fault. Just don't say anything to avoid it. And every injury has got to be recorded, not necessarily formally reported to the agency, but you need to have every injury recorded. And we're just picked up. So we've both been through situations where something that appeared very innocuous at the time, you then get to hear about later was either more serious or maybe something exaggerated. In my case, it wasn't. The guy had a bruised foot, having been run over by a vehicle on a very soft, mushy, wet site, and he had a bruised foot. But his foot was so sore that night that he went to hospital and he'd broken every single bone in the middle of his foot where the tractor was going across. So it then becomes this thing we call RIDDLE, or the reporting of injuries, diseases, dangerous occurrences. Falls under those regulations. Someone, would that be you, is that would send the report off?
Certainly I would try and ensure that it has been sent off, wouldn't necessarily be.
It needs to go. There are consequences from the HSE if a RIDDLE doesn't go. And the rules are, it's only accidents, illnesses, injuries, strains, those sort of things are not reported as RIDDLE. But accidents, things that have fallen or people that have fallen from places, they have got to be reported, not the normal things. And the challenge was going for me is if someone fell off a horse and sprained a wrist. I think that's an accident, so it probably would be something that you would want to record. But if someone stopped their horse, walked over to the side and said, I'm just going to have that jump and just twinge me back or something, that probably wouldn't. There's a kind of greyish area in the middle that even the HSC say, you're not quite sure, but if you're not sure, report it. It's safer to do it that way. Any death, there's a whole list of specified injuries that I'm not going to get into because they include burns and chemical exposure and exposure to smoke and all that sort of stuff. It wouldn't apply to you. And anything that you think is going to lead to incapacitation, people being away from work or away from normal activities for 7 days or more, and that's where we fell down on this one because we thought Bruce thought he was going to be back to work the next day. He wasn't broken all the bones in his feet because suddenly it was RIDDLE reportable, except he didn't tell us. And the first I knew about it was 4 months later when the HSC came in contact and said, you had a RIDDLE reportable incident that you didn't report. We said, oh, no idea. He never told anybody. And because he was a transient worker, he just disappeared for a few. But any injuries to the public that occur as a result of something on your site that ends up with them being taken directly to hospital treatment. Now, there is one query on this. If you have a medical treatment centre on site, like an ambulance, is that to hospital? The answer is no. So somebody's going in there with sticking plaster because they've got a splinter or anything like that, absolutely not. But if either the medical service take them to hospital or they call an ambulance to take them to hospital, because of something that's happened on your event site, which is an actual injury, then it's got to be RIDDOR reported. It doesn't matter if you don't know how to report a RIDDOR, it's actually relatively easy to go online. You just need to know to tell somebody in the office that we've had an incident that may or may not be RIDDOR reportable. I'm not sure, I just need to make sure you know about it. And the most important thing you can do at that point is start taking some details, just some names and addresses and how it happened. The photograph is worth gold dust. If someone's tripped over a step, some pictures of that step in the first few minutes afterwards is really, really valuable.
If somebody does get taken to hospital and they're checked over and then they're sent home with that step in that day, is that still RIDDOR reportable?
Yeah, someone that's gone directly to hospital from a scene, a site, because they've been tripped. The reason for that is they have been injured, even if they've been discharged, doesn't mean the next day they're not going to suddenly find they've got an injury or find they can't go to work, and suddenly there's going to be an insurance claim, and there might be an HSE investigation. So if they go to hospital, assume it's going to be a RIDDOR structure.
I'm still trying to understand that if they actually went in and then were sent home,
Yeah, the rules actually say you should. So this is for a member of the public, not necessarily a member of staff. It's a member of staff who you've got control over. They go to hospital, they're discharged, they phone you and say, yeah, x-ray's fine, no bone's broken, bit bruised, back to work tomorrow. Then no, they're not.
I think that's well,
Yeah, it's the public. The public are funny beasts.
Yeah.
Not to be trusted under any circumstances. And hey, when there's blame, there's a claim. So they go and ramp it up, some of them. And not for your attendees. Most of them are not the sort of people that are going to do this, but the general public may well. So if you get a call from your insurance company, which I have both been in that situation 4 months later, one of the very first questions from them is, what's the reference for the RIDDOR report so we can go to the HSE and get a copy of it and go. We didn't RIDDOR report it because it's inappropriate. They are a bit of a pain, the RIDDOR reports. I would say 95% of the ones I've submitted, I've never heard anything back. Literally, not even an acknowledgement. But sometimes they come back and say, oh, could you go and get statements from? And then you're going to be sharing the workload around saying, hey, 3 witnesses, we need to know a little bit more. And we get a brief statement from you. And it doesn't have to be detailed, it's just what did you see on that? I talked about evacuation. I'd love to go into more detail. There is a brilliant book on the market. Dawn is going to remind me of the name of the author. Never remember. Amanda Ripley. It's called The Unthinkable. Who survives when disaster strikes and why? And it is a fantastic story. It reads like a novel. You can read it, sit in bed one night over a cup of coffee. But she explains how our brains work in emergencies. She explains why the average evacuation time before people actually got up and walked away from their seats at 9/11 was 6 minutes. Can you imagine waiting in a building that's just been hit by an aeroplane that's been rocked 4.5 feet from side to side, smoke going out of the building, burning aeroplane parts falling down the side outside your office window? 6 minutes was the average time for people to get up and actually start to evacuate the building. Because we try to explain this as, that's unusual, I've never heard that before. I wonder if it was, I wonder if it was, I wonder if it was. Your brain goes through this whole process of trying to rationalise what was actually a catastrophe, and you should have just got up and got out the door. But that book, Amanda Ripley, The Unthinkable, incredible book. It will explain to you why people hardly ever panic, and normally they actually underreact. If we were doing a crowd psychology course, I would show you a video from the Streatham suicide bomber attack from last year or the year before, where the guy had a suicide vest. He goes around stabbing people in Streatham High Street. And a couple of minutes later, a police officer with all his guns and whistles, big vest, and he walks into a cafe and says, ladies and gentlemen, there's been an attack just down the road. We're dealing with a terrorist incident. Could you all just get up, come out this way and leave? And they're all going, what? Why we just, I'm just finishing. And the cafe owner says, hang on, officer. They've all just ordered their breakfast. Can we give them half an hour to finish and pay, and then we'll leave? And his tone changes, and he is the most passive-aggressive cop I've ever seen. If you want to leave them sitting here for 30 minutes having their breakfast while there's a man with a suicide vest who just stabbed 3 people, and you want to be responsible for their safety, then by all means go ahead. But if you want to be alive and stay safe, leave now. By the time he's finished speaking, everybody's on their feet and out the door. And that is the reality of emergency situations. People go like, really? Not me. Now, these things don't happen to people like me until somebody actually gives you a shake almost and says, this is real, it's not a film set, it's not a practice, it's not a rehearsal, it's not a dress rehearsal. This is real, it's happening now, and you need to get out. You may have to be a lot more forceful verbally with people in an emergency than you ever expect to be. You can see what's happening, they can see what's happening, but you've got the person in your ear saying, we've got a problem, we need to get out now. But then we get that realisation that genuinely hasn't occurred. Be aware, and don't be surprised when people underreact to emergency. Even if the danger is obvious, people sometimes underreact. They don't think that they're going to be affected by it. And you might have to do that little bit of push. If your air ambulance, has everybody seen this? You need to call an air ambulance on site. Just be aware of this. It is in the guidance, in the notes, your emergency procedures, isn't it? This is the one that possibly scares me more than anything else on your event site. If you had an injury that was so bad that the air ambulance had to be called, because you might get 12 or 13 minutes warning, but if it just happens to be flying back from another job and it's a minute away, your warning time might be a couple of minutes. Whoever calls the ambulance needs to let them know that you need to be told if the air ambulance is coming. So when you dial 999 and say, we're an equine event, we have got a fallen rider, suspected serious neck, back, blah, 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 blah. Can you advise us if it's anything other than a land ambulance? Because if it's an air ambulance, we need to dismount 200 riders. And by the way, this is not going to be easy because this is the Riding for Disabled National Championships. We've got 500 horses, 2,000 disabled riders, and it's going to be a complex operation. You need to ring us back if the plan is to send an air ambulance. You need to have that notice. That's probably the thing that makes me most twitchy. You know, that one time when we had a fall last year, I keep saying last year, 19, when we had that fall, it was quite a prolonged stopping, wasn't it, in the ring? And I'm thinking all the time, what if an air ambulance was coming? They haven't told them. What if they're sending one and they haven't told them?
Would that be, Eric, would that be from our first aiders on site? Would they do that?
It might be, but the problem is you can't guarantee that a member of the public won't the phone dial 999 before somebody else does. That's the problem. For most witnessed car crashes on the motorway these days, they average 30 to 40 999 calls. So you might not have control of that information. I would always say, if your ambulance responders are there, someone from head office needs to be alongside them, and just remind them that for you, an air ambulance response, you're not going to turn it down, and you're not going to ask for it to be delayed, but they do need to tell you, if they've dialed 999, have you, when you dial 999, told them that this is a riding championship, lots of loose horses, and lots of disabled riders, send the air ambulance, and then go, you didn't think about that, brief them beforehand.
So I guess on the back of that then, we need like a strategy, don't we? If that was to happen, what are we going to do?
Yeah. The one thing I would do, I think I would almost certainly do is, as well as relying on the medical, as well as potentially the public, I think someone in the office would probably also be contacting the ambulance service and saying, you've already had calls on this, we have a rider on the floor, the medical team are with them, but we do need ambulance. I just need you to tell me if you're sending an air ambulance, because we're going to have to put some stuff in place before that air ambulance gets too close. Yeah, I mean, the air ambulance crews is brilliant. They will come along, and if they saw a load of horses still loose or with riders on the back, they're going to overshoot. But that's going to delay their attendance. So they're not going to come and land in the middle of a paddock when it's a bunch of horses. Very, very early.
There's, I was going to say, there's only certain locations that there's enough room for it to land anyway. So when we last had one in 2015, not an air ambulance, but somebody came by helicopter, they had to
Down by them.
they had to land by their Hartbury house.
If the air ambulance is coming, it will probably land in the middle of the big room.
Oh, really?
Because
Okay.
they can land anywhere they want, anywhere that they perceive as safe. What I can't remember is you've got the high tension pylons going on the top. I can't remember. I can't remember if there's any. When you go down,
I'll check. I don't think there is. No. The only other area I suppose is the camping.
Yeah, I mean, they do land on it's not very often,
Okay.
but they will put down. I think if you had an injury in that main arena,
They'd put that.
actually no, if you had an injury in the main arena, they'd probably go over the back.
Not anymore because there's a new school.
Oh, is there?
Yeah. There's a new indoor school with a roof on.
With a roof.
Yeah, they would find, like you say, there's places out the back and stuff.
They can land on tiny spots. They will.
But yeah, this is all in our health and safety. This is, yeah.
I had one pony a few years ago, and they landed with kill for but we cleared them away. We've actually got a horse out of the way.
If you've got all the horses and children into one corner of the field, they will assume that you have control of those, that you're actually giving them the rest of the field.
Yeah.
They will make that assumption. What's the is that still the case down at Hartbury that you would blast an air?
Yes, yeah. It's in my sturdy box. My sturdy secretary's box. 3 rolls of Velcro.
But you've got the PAs, right? You've got
Yeah,
the announcements,
yeah.
You've got.
Yeah.
It's just that, let's be honest, when you're busy sorting out your horses or your children or your adult riders, and the PA announcements go, you actually listening to what's being said.
No, this is what we find
Which
sometimes.
the air horn would be something that you would hear very rarely. It would make go. So the air horn followed by the emergency announcement. Listen very carefully. Let people tune in. They then might stop. But you still, this is when all of us would be working really hard, wandering around over the radio. We know there's an air ambulance coming. And there's a couple of riders out there still on their horses. How did they not get the message? Well, it's up to us to make sure they've got the message. And then making sure that it is the one that scares me a little bit. But there's limits to what you can do. I won't go through all those in detail. They are on the slides and they are in your packs. They're part of your emergency procedures. Like I say, if you've got an emergency, it's a bit late to then be going back to the emergency procedure book. You don't need to know all these off by heart, but it should be when you've read them in advance, when something happens on the day, you will remember most of the things will start to come back to you. And as long as you remember the majority, that's fine. This is something we can all do. Burger vans, ice cream vans, they are notorious for just chucking the rubbish out the back. And they make a big stack of cardboard. There's nothing much more flammable on the vent site on lots of the day than cardboard with a glass bottle in it. You must have all done that experiment where you use the glass bottle to exactly focus the flame on the back of your hand and go, that was stupid. I'll just make them. Okay, hold on. Somebody conned me into it when I was about 7. Oh, look at this is a good trick. You can make a little bright light on the back of your hand and ow, damn, that hurts. That's hot enough to set fire to cardboard. And if they've chucked a lot of rubbish out the back and then somebody else has seen a pile of rubbish just chucked a glass bottle on it, or they've chucked a glass bottle on it, that's a fire. By the time they realise that the cardboard's on fire, so is the burger van. All we need to do is either go around and help to keep it tidy, or if we're confident, go to the burger man and say, do something about your rubbish out the back, because it's a little bit dangerous. Or we call the office and say, can someone who's a bit more confident come and tell the burger man and sort out his trash that he's bad about. Unplugging equipment or gangways and don't waste. Must be mad. I make a habit now of every now and again in the building, I'm working there all day, I will actually go, if I'm walking past the emergency exit, unless it says this door is alarmed, which it shouldn't be. If it says this door is alarmed, I open it, Just make sure, I mean, these sort of doors are brilliant because you can see that nothing's blocking outside. You can see through there that nobody's blocked our exit. But most emergency doors don't have glass panels in them still. You don't know what's beyond it. So I just make a habit of popping the door open with a quick check and just have a quick look out. And particularly if the exit is onto a staircase, which I know it is from your office, the sheriff's office. You walk out onto a staircase, don't you? Several of those officers along there go out and then go out to the
Yeah, they all do.
Just make sure somebody hasn't left the pile of boxes on that staircase that they're going to come back for in a minute, but they might not remember for a couple of hours.
Yeah, the chairs that keep the doors
Chairs at
open.
the bottom, yeah, so half the people have decided to have a little
Yeah.
chat and then they've gone off and I've actually left those chairs at the bottom of the fire exit. Just, it's things like that. It's
We need some
silly,
door
simple
stops.
things that will help us. The one day when it all goes wrong, and we do have to evacuate, not having those chairs in, putting that one thing that makes a difference to everybody getting out. Okay. Flammable materials away from heat sources, again, burger vans, people like that. People, you know, we're doing looking for that sort of stuff, walking around the back of the burger vans. But we're all responsible for doing this. Just having a quick check and then calling someone and saying, I'm a little bit uncomfortable about that. Closing doors and windows when room buildings are not in use, probably not applicable for us too much. That's something down the champs. We are going to, weather permitting, you're going to have beautiful weather and you're going to have all the doors and windows open. And if you're just nipping out of the office for 5 minutes and then nipping back, that's not a major problem. Understanding where you're expected to go in the event of evacuation. Again, a bit of the brain, we call it return route path. A little bit of the brain that physically draws the route that we will use. And 9 times out of 10, you will leave a building via the one entrance that you use to get in there. That's not always going to be the best way. Go back to 9/11 again. The people that survived are the people that practice using different firewalls, different staircases, different routes, because if one route is blocked, and that's the reason why I said to you today, people in the back go out that door, people in the front go out that door. I've told all of you that there's actually 2 options. I've tried to overrule this return route syndrome that we all suffer from. And there's 40 or 50 different factors in the brain that come into play in an emergency. And if we can just trigger 1 or 2 of them to work a little bit better, a little bit safer, and I would genuinely, if I looked out there and saw smoke and flames, I would probably put a chair through these windows. I think the better option, walking into the smoke and flames. Anybody remember the Bradford fire? 1985?
Is that the stands?
Yeah, 2/3 of the people that died on the stand died because they went back in the way they came out, went towards the emergency exit. Whereas they could have just climbed up the fence onto the pitch, but they went back and they walked into the smoke and flames. Our brains aren't as clever as we think they are, so we just need to give them a little bit of a kick sometimes. Know where the fire alarm bells are. What is the procedure? I won't be standing there going, there's a fire and I don't know what to do. If it's just called in on the radio, I can't remember, I honestly can't remember. Do you use code words?
No,
I think the fact that none of you are saying yes. Good, because I'm sick to death of seeing a dustbin on fire, 50 members of the public standing around filming it, and the security guard saying, Mr. Ash is in a waste bin in the south car park. Mr. Ash is in a waste bin. The public are all looking and going, what? And security going, what was Mr. Ash again? Hang on, let's get the code word list out. If the bin's on fire and everybody knows it's on fire, why don't we just say there's a bin on fire? Really. Vehicles. 2019 to 2022, the world has changed. There are about 10 times as many electric vehicles out there now as they were. Electric vehicles driving on grass are silent. Watch out for them, because if they're doing 15 or 20 mile an hour and you're just stepping across between 2 cars, I think every single electric car should have a little engine noise generator in it. Some of them do. I think they all should. Just be careful with electric cars. Make sure people are sticking to the limits. Make sure people are driving through crowds, which they shouldn't be, that somebody is walking them through. Horse boxes. How many horse boxes have actually got cameras, reversing cameras mounted in them? Yeah, if you've forked out an awful lot of money, how many horse boxes are those converted camper vans or quite a few, and a lot of them are home conversions which somebody's then sold on. Reversing or walking behind a horse box is inherently dangerous. Give people plenty of time to react. If you have to literally step in front of the car, if the car stopped and they're trying to get through the crowd, if you want to and you're comfortable doing it, you walk ahead of them. And it's at walking pace while we ask people to get out of the way. It's not normal to have cars driving through crowds. It's not safe. But sometimes we do have to get emergency vehicles, including police vehicles. We might have to meet police vehicles at the gate and say, guys, the minute emergency is passed, we do need you up there, but can we kill the sirens? Because we've got a ton of horses jumping around. And can you follow me and I'll walk you to exactly where we need to go to. And then we walk ahead in our high jacket and walk going through the crowd. They might not like it, but you're doing the right thing. Police, ambulance, fire all think it's safe to drive through crowds. We know it's not. Trafalgar Square 1982 New Year's Eve, 2 people killed because a fire engine drove through a crowd and caused a progressive crowd collapse. A pile of bodies, about 300 in total, which killed 2 people at the bottom of it. Vehicles in crowds are really dangerous. Make sure everybody parks where they should do. There was a little bit of parking on grass verges. 2019, there was a few people. They got the cars were announced. People were asked to move. They got back to cars and moved. The car park was getting a bit full, and people pulled from grass verges, which made emergency entrances and exits a little bit thin. You've got those spaces. Make sure we use them. That's probably the job I would like least. Sorting out the horse boxes and where they park. Because I don't know how much room a horse needs to get out of the horse box because I'm not a horse person. So
it's really slippy as well. When they come off the lorries at
I've seen them skidding around.
Yeah, because it's a smooth tarmac.
Yeah.
It's not pleasant.
I mean, the horse box does not have mats in that they can put down.
No, but it's just extra to bring, isn't it?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Weight and so on.
Yeah, I've seen them coming, looking pretty skitty coming down there.
They come off though by your office, don't they?
Yeah, it's really smooth.
So then when they're parking up, they are parking up unloaded. Like, again, not, yeah.
Sometimes, not always. Sometimes they'll go back on by brown.
Oh, will they? Oh, okay.
And that's the big one for me. And I saw that only once in 19, where I didn't know what the gate was for. There was a gate in the fence and someone parked right by it. I don't know if that is an emergency gate to get our trucks or ambulances to. So if you see any vehicles parked in front of or so close to a gate that the gate would struggle to be used, then please call it to the office and try and get someone down there to announce the registration. So, yeah. I must admit, I didn't think Hartbury were particularly good on their gate signage. I mean, an emergency gate should have an emergency gate sign on it, but it looked a little bit tired and they may have done a whole lot of work on this. Again, not my area of expertise, stable yards. I know we've had some discussions about it. If it's not being overseen directly and you see something that doesn't look right, then say it. You see something that you think looks dangerous, report it. Or if you're capable, competent and confident, deal with it yourself. Don't just let it go. Even if that includes the behaviour of some of the people in there. They are doing things that you know, because you know pretty well what's sensible behaviour around horses and what isn't. If it doesn't look right, then please say something. Report it up the chain so people know that. No smoking except in permitted areas. That's the one, I don't know why, but that's the one that we're having so much conflict with at the moment. People going to events and smoking wherever they want. And then when they're asked not to, you're really grumpy. Who the hell do you think you are? For 2 years being told what to do by the government, I'm not going to listen to you. A real strange attitude out of the moment, a real unpleasant nastiness.
Does that include the e-cigarettes as well?
In the areas, if you've designated those as no smoking and no e-smoking, then there shouldn't be e-smoking. People seem to think that they are different. I mean, they are different in many ways, but
you can
if
still
it's a designated...
horses can still smell them. I just, you know.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes some of the stuff that people are smoking there, I find even less pleasant than bringing, you know, I don't particularly want to inhale boiled sugar, that's what it is. And those flavours are really strong sometimes. So I don't know if that, I have no idea if that would trigger a horse off. Absolutely no idea. But if it would, there's any chance it would, then that's what we... some of these are really obvious, I hope. I hope.
I think you'll move on quickly.
Well, we can move on from that one. Those that need PPE, I think the one good thing from COVID is that everybody in the country now understands what the phrase PPE actually stands for. How many times did we hear it from ministers? Although the vast majority of times they got it wrong because they kept calling it PPE equipment, like personal protective equipment. Okay. But I think the whole country now understands what PPE means. There are places where you need some protective equipment. If that's the case, it has to be worn. That is the responsibility of the RDA and of the wearer and the people that are wandering around as volunteers helping out with the officers. So please make sure that if there are places where people should be wearing their riding helmets, they're wearing their riding helmet. I know you check the helmets and everything else, but still, people might just think, oh, I'm only going a short distance, I don't need a helmet for this bit. Please make sure of that. I think that second last paragraph there is just about our self-responsibility. The more self-responsible we are, the more we are entitled to ask other people to be responsible as well. The better we can be at doing what we do, I think the more entitled we become to tell people the right way to do things. See it, say it, sort it. If it doesn't look right and you're not sure, just tell someone or ask someone. Don't ever walk away thinking, I wish I hadn't left. In hindsight, we should have done something about it. We'll quickly do lost and found children and vulnerable adults. The latest phrase that's now used is father. Children and vulnerable adults is the phrase that you'll hear bandied around quite a lot. There is no age limit in terms of vulnerable people. There just isn't. If we have people reported missing and there are concerns about that person, we need to step in really quickly. The first thing we need to know is the location. These are for found children. The second thing we need to know is, are you reporting a child or vulnerable adult missing or found? That's the most basic thing that confuses people all the time. Found children, found vulnerable adults, I'm pretty relaxed about. What's the problem? The worst thing we've got is a stressed, worried parent or carer. They're going to be frantic. But at least we've not got a vulnerable child because we've got control of it. So I have found a child is better than I've got a missing child. Well, you have got a missing child, but we haven't got a missing child, have we? If there is no missing child, the child's with you. They may be missing from somewhere else. Think of the phrase that you're going to use on the radio. I have found a child is a better phrase than I've got a missing child, because there's no confusion with that. I have found a child. We don't generally use the name. We might use initials sometimes if the child tells us. Just be a little bit careful, because if children or vulnerable adults have been separated from parents for some time, they are going to be upset, they are going to be distressed, and some of them will run up and give you a hug when you offer help. That looks bad to other people sometimes. So try and avoid overt physical contact. If you have another person with you, make sure you both stay there, and then take them when you can, and when it's appropriate after a few minutes, to the designated place of stay. I always say within a few minutes, because we do sometimes say 5 to 10 minutes, and that can be the right time. And the vast majority of children that get separated from their parents will find them within a couple of minutes by going back to where they saw them last. And there's a really good chance that you're at the place they saw them last. If you keep them there, there's a good chance the parents are going to come back. And hopefully the natural reaction of the kid or vulnerable adults, if those out there and goes, "Mommy, Daddy," whatever, and you know you've got hit, thank you very much. Still make a note of it. Still make a note of it and make sure it's reported to central office, just in case. The ones that worry me are lost children and vulnerable adults. So what do we need? We need a general description. One of the things we're doing at a lot of event sites now, in the car park, as people are getting out, if we've got any spare volunteers, we're giving the parents a wristband. We're saying to the parent that these are available, then we can get them virtually free, actually. In fact, can get them free if you haven't got them. We're saying to the parent, can you just write the telephone number on the wristband and then put it onto the child so it's secure. We can help you on the child so it's secure. If the child is over the age of 7 or 8, make sure they're writing the parent's number on there, because it's not uncommon to find a child, ring the number on the wristband, the phone starts ringing in the child's pocket. That's not especially helpful. The parent's contact number, please. Above the age of about 12 or 13, forget it. No teenager is going to walk around with a bright wristband and just They're going to cut it off within a few minutes. You try, but we can offer these out in car parks just in case. And the other thing we would normally say is, just in case they get lost today, do us a favour, can you take a quick picture on your phone now, what they're wearing? And then if they do go missing, we can take that and we can spread it to all the security and the volunteers straight away. And we can do that on WhatsApp. In the space of 20 seconds, we can go, you're looking for him, you're looking for her, rather than it's a 7-year-old girl with blonde hair, that picture in front of me, and that, they're not in my vicinity, but that's now memorised. I've got that. So ask parents to take a picture of their own children. You don't, there's no, if anybody says, oh, there's data protection and there's rights issues here, not, because you're asking the parents to take a picture on their own phone. It's nothing, you're not getting that information until such time the parent comes to you and says, I've got a problem, I've lost my child. Did you take a picture of them this morning? Yes. Do you mind sharing that with us? We will delete it from the system as soon as the child is found. Is that okay? Yes, by all means, right. Send it to me on this number now, and it can go around the WhatsApp group. And it's handy to have those WhatsApp. Try to keep the person with you if you can. So the person that's reporting them, in 90% of cases, the parent or adult finds their own child and then promptly forgets to tell you that they found their own child. So you spend the next hour looking for a missing child who's actually already in the car on the way home. You're wasting an awful lot of time. And if after an hour you haven't found a child, you are in a crisis. You really are. That is going to be all encompassing. Sometimes people ask when they should report to the police. That is very much the case for the person who reports to. Okay, are they vulnerable? Are there any unusual circumstances? Are there things that we should be really concerned about? Do you think we need to be contacting the police yet? Or are you happy for us to have a 5-minute search or 2-minute search? So leave that with them. 15 to 20 minutes for a child or a vulnerable adult, I would say, is my comfort zone before I do contact the police. I wouldn't want to go much more than that, because on your site, if you can't find a child in 15 minutes and we're all looking for them, I'm going to start getting a little bit concerned. One of the things I'm going to be concerned about is they've wandered off the site and we don't have the resources, or they've been taken off site. The first, most important place to look for missing children when you get that report is all the exits. Where could they go? How could they get out? What are the different places they can be by? They're the first places that we go to. Don't use the names. Sometimes we'll use initials on some event sites where we've got, and there can be anything up to a dozen or 15 or 20 missing persons going at any one time. So allocating them the initials is quite a useful way of doing it. But please try and keep that person with you if you can. Keep a log, keep a record of everything that's happened, and do everything that's as safe as you can. That's what they say. No one's intentionally careless, but sometimes clever people do careless things. One of my favourite photographs, this is the British government and National Counterterrorism Security Office from London giving a presentation on how to undertake an emergency evacuation, and they're doing that in Greece. How to undertake an emergency evacuation. Can anybody see the exit sign?
Yeah.
How do you evacuate with that left when they have covered it with the stand and their signs? Sensible people. These are grown-ups, these are adults. They're doing very, very sensible stuff.
Definitely something that sticks in my mind when we had a lost child a few years ago, and somebody.
Don't look at me.
I was going to say, don't look at me.
Somebody
Stands casually around.
the previous member of staff instructed the no car should be fine. Kind of stuck in my mind as being,
We have done that.
Is that kind of
So
is that
if you've got security that can get to the exit gates, and for you that's relatively easy, it's one gate by the car park, security room, I would say yes.
We've got a problem though with the main car park, which is up by the house.
Yeah.
You can't stop anybody going there.
No.
They can walk there and get in their car and go. Which if anybody was going to, heaven forbid, of course, if anybody was going to actually do that sort of thing, that's the place where they would go.
Yeah, but then they all come out.
Same exit.
It's all coming down that
They'll come down that road. So what?
So
So
can go the other way. There isn't a way out.
no, they all come out.
They
So,
come out.
but the only problem is that that is then classed as a main road. I then don't know whether we would get in trouble by stopping any vehicles coming up that made that, because that,
Well, by the time we're in trouble.
well, I suppose, yeah. I suppose if it's a case of trying to keep somebody safe and getting in trouble for stopping some cars,
What's
then
the least worst option? The least worst option is that we're stopping those cars and somebody's complaining about it. What we do, one hour, identify the only way out is on the public road. And technically, we have no authority to stop the vehicle, but we've never ever had a complaint yet where we've had missing shopping down in Surrey. So we'd stop the car and just drive to one minute and say, really, really sorry about this. There's a child gone missing, he's only 5 years old, wearing blah, blah, blah. Have you seen them now? Is there any chance that when you opened your doors, just when you went to leave, that they could have jumped in or jumped in the boot? Would you mind checking for me? And what we never say is, I want to search your car. But would you mind checking for me? And if they go, no, I'm not doing that, then the first thing I'll be doing is calling the police.
yeah.
Because if someone's not prepared to help me to try and find a 5-year-old missing child, when the parents are frantic, I'm going to start getting concerned. I'll be calling control, and then the police on site asking them to bring their straight away. We've never ever had that. I mean, the history of child abduction in events of the UK is virtually zero. It's almost non-existent. But we still have this carry on where we never put names out of the radio just in case the lurking paedophile hears the name and that gives them an advantage in snatching this child. There's just no history of that happening. We're being super, super cautious. But I think that's right. I think we are being super cautious. We should be. But I think stopping a car on a public highway, which would actually not break a law, but would leave you slightly vulnerable, but to stop a car, stop a driver and say, could you help us, please? This is our situation. I think a lack of cooperation on the part of that driver and that vehicle not wanting to do that, I think it would be a massive trigger for me to get my phone out, start taking pictures and dial in 999 at the same time to say, this car's just refused to cooperate and search for a 5-year-old child and now leaving sight of speed. Because I might exaggerate the fact that they span their wheels as they drove away from us, just to make sure the police do take it. I'm going to stop there. We could talk all day, there's a ton of stuff, and I will gladly at any stage in the future come back, but I'm going to say, are there any questions? We've done a ton of stuff, appreciate that. And it may well be, I'm going to send you, we've done 3 presentations, I'm going to send you 5. We just haven't got time to get through it all, but this could be a 2-day course as well. Please have a think about what we said today. Sod's Law says as soon as I walk out here, you'll go, damn, I meant to ask. I will put, you will have my contact details. You've both got my contact details anyway.
It's on the front.
It is on the front. It's on on the joining instructions. It's on there down the bottom. Give us a ring, drop us an email. Any questions, please. We will always try to help. It's a tricky topic. You know, you say health and safety, everybody's boring. Actually, it's not. If we use the word public safety or looking after people, we'd all take it far more seriously. Because that phrase health and safety bores people, and people switch off, not you, but other people. But it is really important what we're doing. We are putting ourselves in a vulnerable position by inviting thousands of people to come onto one event site, and we are beholden to look after them when they get there and have the best plans in place, even if they do something stupid, to make sure that we can then look after them as best we can. So good luck.
I've got a question.
Please go ahead.
Are you going to be there with us?
Oh,
yes.
You've got the dates.
Can I direct that
It's really
question?
good on the walkway. I have
Can I direct that question to the boss? We don't know yet, is the answer. It's the busiest summer I have ever known. We're trying to free some stuff up, but we agreed to a contract a long time ago, which has been carried over from 20 to 21 to 22, and part of that contract falls that weekend. So I was hoping I'd have an answer by today, so at least I could say to you yes or no. But I don't know yet, but we are going to try and free that weekend up, and we'll let you know.
That's fine.
Oh, that's fantastic. Because I've got to speak because I've got a meeting. That was brilliant. Thank you.
Take
Nice
care.
to see you
Thanks,
again.
Laura.
Nice to see you all. Take care.
Thanks. I'll try. I'll speak to the boss.
Well, I think we've all had a
Yeah,
very
really
interesting.
good.
It's not an easy subject, but you've put it over extremely well, Eric, and kept us all awake, which I think you know.
That's always a bit without something.
Well, yeah, it's usually an outcome when I do safeguarding. I always hope that's another difficult subject.
But thank you so much. And certainly I've got lots of notes here. Certainly going to put a lot of it, well, most of it into operations for the championship. Because at least if we don't, hopefully we don't have lost children. I think there's only been one or two, in fact, one had just gone off with a brother and sister.
That's not
And hadn't
what it
told,
is.
that's not, yeah, that's what normally happens. I think that's happened with one of them.
Ask the name, that's not a problem, and write it down, just don't put it on the radio, that's the protocol, that we don't put it on the radio, but like I say, that how much more vulnerable are we making that child by putting their name on the radio? I think probably at all, but protocol nationally is that we don't put the name of the missing child on the radio. And that's for code words, I despair with code words. You get these people use Walt and Disney. We've got a Walt situation. What's that? Well, that's an adult important person. Or we've got a Disney. And you hear on the radio, I've got a Disney situation. She's 7 years old, wearing a pink top with blonde hair, last seen 15 minutes ago, heading towards the exit. I think I've just worked out what we're talking about without you saying it was a lost child. You've just given me everything else that I need to know.
So should we? I'm just trying to think what's on the radio channels. So if we have got a situation that, I suppose the thing is actually, if we've got a situation where we need to discuss something fairly private, I need to radio Anne and say, you need to come down to the events.
Yes, don't do what they used to do.
And do you know what I mean? To say, go to Red Channel 8, because then everyone goes to Channel 8, don't they?
Yes, we're all
So-
there.
So have a code word for it. That is one time where we have a code word. So if we've got, it's normally tea bags. We've got one code word. If I need to move large amounts of money around
Jelly
the event
babies.
site, I don't want people to know I'm moving large amount of money around the event site. But if I need 3 people on a secure channel, I don't even put that on the radio list. So I'll show
Okay.
channels 1 to 7, but there's a channel 8 that nobody else knows about. Anne knows about it, you know about it, Dawn knows about it, Peter knows about it. And if I said to you, and we've got that problem with tea bags again, or something really innocuous, or people got that problem with tea bags again, you know that means
Okay.
that means you say, oh, I'll send someone to the supermarket. No, hopefully you remember.
I've run out of jelly babies, Anne.
No, because you might run out of jelly babies, no one can switch to channel 8. You know? So something silly like that.
Yeah.
Tea bags is a good one. You know, we've run out
I
of
know
tea bags
jelly
again.
babies, they know me.
Yeah, paper cups now means we're moving money around the event site, but tea bags means we want everything to move on to and later. We've got a situation that we don't want anybody to know about other than the 4, 5, 6 players.
That's a good idea.
Anything else?
Can I just ask briefly about, we talk about evacuating private people, but thinking along the lines of evacuating horses from stables. I'm slightly mentally scarred for this because I used to be in the fire service and I went out once to stable yard fire. And in the chaos of people evacuating horses from stables, they forgot to shut the gates, the horse went out to the road, got killed by a car. And it's the kind of thing, like my role at Champs is stable manager, and it's the kind of thing where we're evacuating hundreds of horses onto tarmac, where there's potentially disabled people, lorries, it's in the horrors.
Remember what I said about our perception of risk being different depending on our life experiences?
Yeah. My
Perfect,
perception of that risk is like,
perfect example. Wouldn't even occur to me, yes, we've got all the horses out of the stable, thank goodness. Has everybody checked the gates? I wouldn't be thinking like that, but you will now. But it's a really, really good point. Where do the horses go to, and is it
we
secure?
can't be saying the car park is evacuation. I mean,
For
thinking
the
about
horses.
the
I think, do you know what, Emma? I think it should be that new arena.
yeah,
That new,
to look at when we go.
yeah.
What's
Maybe
the
it's-
fun?
Because it's spread as well, you maybe got the
Yeah.
car park and sensible to that end of the yard, not that end.
No, and that's the thing. You've got some of that you're going to have to not make up on the day,
Yeah.
but it won't be
Depending on the
one plan.
situation.
It can't be one plan.
Yeah.
How many horses is the most you have at any one time? It's the big numbers.
How many stables do we have? 81, 91?
You've got 2 blocks, haven't you? You've got that block,
Yeah.
and then there's a sort of like another.
And that's with people coming in there. We'd probably have about 250.
So it might actually be 2 locations.
Yeah.
Because I've looked at the top of my head, I'm 3 years old.
Split
I
that.
can't think of one.
No, no.
The main block is spread.
Yeah.
You go to the main block first, and then gradually, if it was spreading still, I mean, there's no point in 5.
Because that far block that's quite a distance, isn't it? The old stud.
I mean,
Yeah.
the open
Have you
spaces,
put it down there?
the open spaces are where you want them. So they're going to be less spooked in open
Yeah.
spaces. One thing I have seen is horses that have smelled smoke, and that is something that really, makes me scared looking at those horses that can smell smoke. The 5 miles away, but smoke is open towards them. They're not really
You think of the lorries, the day lorries that have their horses tied up right by them.
Yeah, absolutely.
That big farm.
Many
I
lorries
can't
come out.
answer.
No, but we've
I can't
said,
give the solution to that.
and we've said no tying to side lorries. They've either got to book a day stable or they've got to be on the lorry.
But also there's no gate on the walkway, so the horses will actually come down the walkway. If you've got 200 horses walking that out in the stables, they're going to go right.
If they spook by the
So that's why we need you at the top of the walkway.
with a long piece of road.
No,
Still got to go either way. I mean, they could be in the whole area.
They could be in the Hartbury, yeah.
Milling everywhere.
no.
The one thing I love doing this sort of training is when it triggers conversations amongst the group themselves afterwards, because that means it's made you start to think about putting this bit of learning into practical situations.
No, I'm going to go and work in Waitrose, I think.
Any other questions that I can answer that are not actually directly horse related? I don't understand those people. Lovely as they are. Love them, but I really don't get them. No?
One of the things that you've been saying all the way along is write it down, write it down, write it down. And I don't know whether that's necessarily something that I'm thinking of stewards, that a person would actually have on them when they're stewarding is a notebook and a pen.
They'd have a clipboard and paper.
There, I could have phone. Now I have a phone and a radio and my clipboard.
But most, do most stewards have a running order?
No,
If
not
you've
on
got a
some of the
phone,
gates
you've
and-
got a voice recorder on it. I
Well,
don't know a
let's see
single
then,
phone that
Bonnet,
hasn't got a
we
voice
can
recorder
get
on it.
sponsored a pen and a notepad for each to go in each volunteer's envelope. And then they've got it on them.
I mean, those little blue notes.
Yeah,
that
surely
we
a
carry,
company can donate,
get-
yeah.
you can get a box of those. For,
Yeah.
I think it's about £11 and they come
Yeah.
with 40 in a box. something like that.
Yeah.
They're next to me. I might even. I'll have a look. I'll have a look, see if we've got a box.
Yeah, I'm sure we can.
A local.
Yeah, a local firm.
Anybody.
Yeah,
Yeah, most people have got a note recording system in the pocket anyway.
yeah.
If they just remember that virtually every
Well, on
phone
your
has got-
phone, you have a note thing,
you've got-
don't you?
Or you can text yourself,
Yeah.
or you can WhatsApp the office. You are making a note of it and you get a date time stamp on it by doing it.
I think a notebook would be better because if you put it on the phone, there's a serious incident and the police will take it back.
Notebook's better. I have a phone, but I always have a notebook.
Yeah, okay.
I think a notebook is better.
The fact that you're walking around with a notebook and pen in your top pocket reminds you sometimes. You know, if the high vis have got the pockets on, or if it's inside, it just sometimes reminds you to make that note.
I find actually with my challenge, some of it is our virtual parents, grandparents, and people like that coming down. They'll come down sort of walkway with the horse because they've managed to get through that, and then they arrive and they're sort of crowding around. It's trying to sort of really move them, get them moving around, get them out of the way.
Yeah,
You know,
It's one of the tough parts at the top of the walkway as well,
Yeah.
is to say it's
Yeah.
the guide and the rider and the horse. The rest of the family need to go the other way around. Some of them are more cooperative than others.
Longer than a horse.
We do what we can. We're not going to get into fights with people like that, but we do the best we can.
It's a bit difficult.
Yeah, it is.
Because I know about horses. I've been here before.
Yeah.
Haven't seen you. Get out.
Okay.
Good,
If
thank
there's
you so
nothing else
much.
then, no, thank you, everybody.
Okay.